been sort of loose in the cast prior to the impact.
Good evening, everyone. It is now 5:30, and I will call this regular work session of the Burnsville City Council to order. The clerk will note that all city council members are present, and to our residents and guests who are watching us, this meeting is held both in person and online, and you can join us by Zoom, zoom.us/join. Or also, if you want to communicate with us, you can call us at 651-372-8299. But also on Zoom, we can recognize when you're wishing to speak with us. So with that, our work sessions are informal, and we go directly to our agenda items. The first item on our agenda is the GIS update. And our staff members who are going to be presenting this evening is Matt Taran, our GIS coordinator, and Chris Slania, technical service manager. So, good evening and welcome.
Thank you.
Gentlemen. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Council. It's been a while since I've been in front of you, since my days with the planning department. I had to find all my ties that I haven't worn for a while. As you noted, I am in the IT department now as a services manager. Matt Taran is here. He is our GIS coordinator. We are going to go through a brief overview and some discussion on the city's geographic information systems, geographic information systems, also known as GIS. There's a lot that's happened in this department and in our staffing situation the last 5 years, and we wanted to spend some time to catch you up on that. What is GIS? In short, it's a combination of hardware, software, processes, and data that allows us to analyze geographic information. Most commonly, you see that in maps, but we'll talk about many other tools that lend us different ways to analyze and provide information, not only to council, but also the public. We are actually using a tool this evening. A lot of your presentations at work session and council are by PowerPoint. What we're working off of is actually a story map. It is in itself a GIS tool. It allows us to provide not only maps, but videos, dashboards, other things. So the file that was provided in your council background, it's also available to the public now, is in itself a GIS tool that we're using more commonly now. So how does the city of Burnsville use GIS right now? Quite a bit, and that is growing almost by the day. If you ask Matt the types of emails he's getting and requests he's getting. The first item is pretty interesting and staggering. We were talking about this before the meeting started. Right now we have over 40,000 utility assets marked in the field within
You said 40,000?
40,000.
40.
And we have accuracy within a cubic centimeter. Now, we're not going to go and field test every one of those, but we can certainly get within a foot of those assets, which is very, very helpful when there's snow on the ground, when you're in a rainstorm, when you're trying to get something very quickly. We have this information available to our city crews, and they have it either on their phones or their laptops, and they can get to those assets really quickly when they need to.
And the help of our fiber also in connecting everything is all part of this.
Yep,
So we're
that's
connected.
included in the 40,000 is the fiber mapping.
Yeah, because that's 40,000, that's everything.
Well, there's far more records than that, but that's just what we have mapped to the 1 centimeter accuracy. So like your utility features, your water valves, manholes, fire hydrants, those surface utility features are what's included in that 40,000. Curb stop valves, that type of thing.
This is what this is really good because there's miles and miles of all of this stuff.
Yes.
And people don't realize that it's the stuff under the ground that's much more than the stuff on top of the ground. You
I
had
have
a
a question on the asset and inventory. Does that also include like our street lightings and our sidewalks and that, so we know
Yeah.
exactly where?
Yes,
Every-
but that's
Neighbors are
not
connected or
counted
not
in that
connected?
40,000 feature number. I mean, we have hundreds of thousands of features in total. Again, that 40,000 is just what we have mapped to that high accuracy, but yes, we have sidewalks mapped and streetlights and traffic control signs. Almost everything in the city, to a degree, is mapped at this point. We've got a really robust GIS database.
Thank you.
So you're going to also, coming up here, mapping the coordinated automated vehicle systems that we're going to have to take a look at, and I think Ryan's going to have something presenting to us in '22 with regard to the capital improvement plan and all of that.
There are there's a lot of tools out there, a lot of different softwares and systems you can purchase and expand. We have a little bit of that, but it is something I know specifically Ryan Peterson wants to grow that. And again, it's all about the data and the information you can pull from that infrastructure.
Because Regina, we learned all about the coordinated automatic vehicles and how they travel and what we need to be doing as we move forward with all of this.
So I don't want to disappoint anybody from moving on to some of this other stuff, but discussing vehicles. This is used heavily in street and trail
Oh, yeah,
surveying, pavement, pavement condition and utility condition. Again, not just what you see above ground, but running video cameras through our sewer and water lines and things like that. This is a growing portion of what we're using, but also engagement and community outreach, surveying the citizens, surveying neighborhoods. Again, story maps, interactive maps, all of those are growing in popularity and adding to the toolbox we have. Mobile wayfinding, as I said, many of our staff, volunteers, contractors we hire have these tools on their iPads, on their phones, on their laptops, and can get some of this information almost real time. Operational dashboards, parks and trail maps we've been working on the last couple years. Site selection analysis, this came up with the Grow Burnsville project. It's also something we've used for pop-up park events around the city, helping decision makers determine the best place to set these sites. Obviously, emergency operations and other integrations that I don't want to spoil until we get to that point of the presentation. Backing up just a little bit, a lot of these changes started in 2016. At that time, the city hired WSB to do a strategic analysis and report. Found out that at that time, Burnsville was underutilizing the GIS capabilities out there. There were a couple recommendations put in place. 2017, we completed integration of an internal web map portal, and that connects almost every city department, regardless of what their business need is, with other departments. Engineering with planning, water utilities with utility billing. A lot of that cross-departmental information. And that was quite a big project. In 2018, we were approved for our first full-time GIS person. That would have been Matt's position as GIS coordinator within the IT department. 2019, Matt, along with our systems engineer, Ryan Huss brought a lot of that information in-house on premises. Prior to that, we've been using Logis, we've been using other consulting firms, and it was more practical and economical to bring those resources in-house. In 2020, we updated the strategic plan. Obviously, 4 years, especially in technology, things change quite a bit, so we wanted to update that. In 2021, again, Matt and our other IT staff have been helping integrate other business systems with GIS, specifically permitting, so that when you're dealing with either contractors or homeowners, we can get analysis on that and map things out pretty quickly. And there is obviously much more to come in the future. I will let Matt take over here and get into some of the nuts and bolts of the presentation.
Thanks, Chris. So moving on to the next section of the presentation, we kind of have this framed with some of the city's values, and here we're focusing on excellence in this next section. So the first thing related to how we are achieving excellence with GIS is, as Chris mentioned, the GIS Strategic Plan. So the GIS Strategic Plan is a very important document. It was collaborative in effort in that we had 46 staff members from across the organization contribute to this, sit down with me in needs assessments meetings, provide their feedback to me, and that all is what went into updating this plan. It's a business-focused plan, so the individual departments pretty much identified what their needs were. They maybe didn't know that GIS could solve some of those problems for them, but by telling me what their pain points were and their issues that they were working with, then I was able to present GIS options to them that can help solve these problems for them in real world. So it's kind of like the playbook for going forward for making sure we have an excellent GIS program. It took a long time to update. We did it internally instead of hiring it out because me being new as the GIS coordinator, it was a great opportunity for me to sit down with all the stakeholders and meet them. I was in Public Works previously, so I knew a lot of people on the Public Works side, but I didn't know as many people over here at City Hall. So it was a really good opportunity for me to meet everyone, kind of, like I said, gather what their needs are, and start working toward executing this plan. So a couple of key takeaways from the plan is that, what's happened over the years is improved GIS literacy among the staff has led to an increase in number of business system integrations, which Chris kind of hit on already, and we're going to hit on again later, and also just a greater overall demand for GIS services in the city. It has grown tremendously over the last 3-4 years as staff learn about the capabilities and what they can do with this and how it can help them do their jobs. They're coming knocking on the door asking for more solutions, which is great all around. But it also comes with, a little more need for IT resources that need to be dedicated to supporting this. People are enjoying the technology, but we have to make sure we have the infrastructure and the resources available to stand up these solutions for them and support them long term. And one other takeaway from the strategic plan is just that there's a lot of action items in the strategic plan, and basically we are going to need to rely on subject matter experts from individual departments and business units to be engaged in this process and involved to achieve this plan in the timeline that we set forth in the plan. So without that engagement from our subject matter experts, we probably won't make it through this plan in the stated timeline. So coming down to the next section here, this is an example of, or actually this is a page from the GIS Strategic Plan. This is our enterprise roadmap, and it reads like a checklist. Not sure how well that's showing up on your monitors there, but
Yeah.
Real question.
Okay.
I just want to interrupt for a second. You talked about if you can use your subject matter experts. Is there a roadblock to that, or?
I would say the main challenge to that is just their skill level with GIS. We have GIS users sprinkled throughout the city. We have a couple that are trained GIS professionals in public works, and then we have some other people that have dabbled with it or have some familiarity with it. But that's one big roadblock or challenge, and then the other is just that they all have their other jobs that they're doing, so it's how do they
Yeah.
carve out time to dedicate to doing GIS type work. I think those are the two major hurdles there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I've already got questions, but I'm gonna wait till the end
Okay.
and see all of this.
Maybe I'll
So
answer
tell us
some of
what
them
the
along the
red
way.
means and the black means in your enterprise roadmap.
Oh, yeah. Great question. So, yes, some items are in red, and the items in red were items that were identified by multiple departments during those needs assessment meetings. So they're more of an enterprise type goal where they would benefit multiple departments. The items in black text are really more specific to an individual department. It might have benefits outside the department, but it's mostly a benefit to a single department. So by identifying these ideas or needs that came up across departments and calling them out in red text here, we can kind of set them as a higher priority because we should get the most bang for the buck on those by the more staff benefiting from that or the community benefiting from that as was suggested by staff during the needs assessment meetings. So really, it's just basically a checklist that we can all reference and work our way through it. It attempts to assign priorities to these different tasks, and as we work through the list, we can kind of have a common operating picture and be checking these off and enjoy the gratification of marking them complete and moving on to the next item. So there were 225 tasks that were identified in that enterprise roadmap, and we classified them as near-term, medium-range, or long-range targets for completion. We also identified 91 new GIS layers that we need to develop, or staff would like to have developed. Some of those we need to develop on our own. Some of them are externally sourced layers that we would need to go out to another agency and acquire, which we do sometimes do. The one challenge with that is just that then we're not the data authority anymore. We need to keep going back to that agency or data source and updating the data. A really good example of that is we map like group homes, nursing homes, medical facilities, stuff like that we get from the Minnesota Department of Health licensing, and they don't really have a good automated way for us to pull that into our mapping system, so it's a manual process that I have to do a couple times a year, or I try and do a couple times a
So
year.
we're trying to have more local control on all of this, rather than you can gather the information from outside agencies, but you want to make sure that you have local control on all of these.
Yes, the main reason for bringing it into our database is that then we can show it in our internal GIS application
Sure.
that Chris mentioned before.
Yeah.
We're unable to bring in external data sources into that application, so if it's a very important layer that we want to show in there, we have to basically acquire the data from the outside agency, and then we are able to display it in there.
Yeah, okay, makes sense, yeah. Dan Kay?
To that question, that's an integrations that was probably done on the front end of evaluating whether we would buy GIS or not. Did it come with a large list of fully integrated data partners? Or have you found, since we've got it, how many, what percentage of time are you manually having to input versus an integrated partner where data is imported automatically and you don't have to go through the, data dump and then input?
Yeah, it's a good question. We had a really large database already that we just weren't hosting ourselves. It was kind of disparate data spread throughout our city network in antiquated file formats that engineering had been primarily developing over the years, so it was really public works centric. So, like when we worked with Logis and these other consultants, they helped us develop some of this data. We had some of our own from before. Dakota County helped us develop a lot of this data over the years with our relationship with them. And then as we've put this in staff's hands, then the requests for more data have come in. And, as I've gotten to know what their business needs are, then we realized, hey, we have to be mapping these group homes and, child care facilities and stuff like that for various reasons. So that's when we started going out and acquiring new data. But the licensing and the Esri agreement, Esri is the vendor, it doesn't really come with any data specific to our organization or Burnsville. It does come with, access to base map data and demographic type data, which is really nice. I would say that's the one really big data set that we get from Esri is they make available, they have their own demographic type data, and they also make available census type data to us, which is really valuable to some of the stuff we've been doing, especially the last couple of years.
But we really have a very good understanding of all of the product types then within our city. If you're looking at the different ingredients that make up the city, you talked about group homes and other things, so we really have a good handle.
Yes, we have a very,
on
robust
everything.
GIS library,
Yeah, yeah.
which is good, and it keeps growing. As you can see, even as much as we have, this, staff still want 91
Sure,
new data sets, so
yeah,
there is an appetite out there,
Yeah.
and staff see the value.
okay.
Just a follow-up, what other
Dedicate.
cities use this product, and does the county use it as well?
Yes. ESRI is like your Microsoft of GIS. I think they have 95% of the market, or maybe even more at this point. There are some open source solutions out there that some people use, but it is the most common vendor to go with. Dakota County uses it. All our comparable market cities are using ESRI. Some of them have smaller licensing agreements that don't allow them to do everything we're doing, and they're kind of hamstrung by that. But it's becoming more common now for cities of any decent size to have Esri software and some in-house GIS
I
capabilities.
imagine there's a user group that maybe, cross city lines that shares what you learn because.
Dakota County hosts
sounds
a
like a
GIS
monster of a
user group fairly regularly, and yes, the cities and the county attend that. And Lowe just previously, and they still do actually, and I actually still go even though we're not with them for GIS services anymore, but they also hold GIS meetings. So there are great opportunities to network with other GIS professionals, see the emerging technology, see how other cities and municipalities are using it. So those meetings are out there, and they're valuable. They've been kind of thrown for a loop with COVID, like everything else, but
Sure.
they're still ongoing. The frequency's been cut back a little bit.
Okay.
One last
Ben,
question
Kate?
on training. You kind of touched on it. It's, everyone has their daily work load to get through, and stopping that to sit through training on a new tool that has a lot of promise is a challenge. How much time would it take, rough hours or weeks or whatever, of training would it take for an employee in a department that may not have been, I think you noted that some have been through the course and they're advanced users. What does it take to get a person from ground zero to that point?
Well, actually, depending on what you're asking the person to do, it might be very little. A lot of these tools are really intuitive, and I do have one example further down in the presentation of a story map that was put together by Caleb Ashling in Natural Resources, who he dabbles in GIS, but he's not a trained GIS professional, and he was able to do this all on his own. It's a very GIS has evolved to be very user-friendly and graphic, like with a good graphic user interface where you no longer need to type code in to execute everything. It's all,
Yeah.
move
Good.
the mouse, click on the button,
like it's
so
modern.
so it makes it a lot more attainable for staff to
Sure.
get some GIS proficiency. And where GIS has really taken off is the web platform, web GIS, and that's probably the most straightforward and the easiest GIS tools to use versus like the desktop GIS type stuff that myself or like Doug Cruz in engineering would do, that is really the heavy lifting of GIS, the analysis, the data management part. So there's kind of two tracks there. To get someone going down that GIS professional track, I mean, I went to graduate school for it, so it's
a long road.
it's a big deal. It's a lot of education versus some of these other kind of secondary things you can do, like with the web platform, is a couple hours. So with the Burnsville University tool that we have now, I definitely hope in the future to use that to do some training opportunities for staff and
Thank you.
encourage them to start taking advantage of using these tools on their own versus just having to come to me to do it. I'm just going to kind of skip down. Let's see. I think I kind of hit on this. Here's an example of a business unit specific roadmap. This happens to actually be for natural resources. So one of the big changes from the plan that we got in 2016 from WSB and the one we just did internally is that it's got a new format. It's very graphic based. The idea here is that this is a 11 by 17 piece of paper that someone in natural resources that's involved with GIS can print off and stick on their cube or leave on their desk or, bookmark it on their desktop or their computer or whatever. But it's a quick reference that they can go back to and they can see everything we talked about in that meeting and they know exactly, okay, what are our GIS goals? What are we going to do? And they can come to me and say, hey, we're ready to start this item down here, when are we going to start it? We labeled it as a near-term priority, so let's get it on the work plan. So really, all these individual plans kind of talk about their pain points that they describe to me and solutions that we can implement to help deal with those, and then how do we get there? So it's almost reads as both like a strategic document and a work plan for each of these business units.
You know what I like about what you just put forth with the natural resources? You have a vision that's right there at the very top of this.
Yeah.
And then you have the geospatial vision then, so it just rolls on down and.
Yes, it really is a very, very business-focused plan.
Yeah.
And that's the idea here is this wasn't me telling them, you should be doing this, this, and this with GIS. This was me sitting down with them and saying, oh, I hear what you're saying. We can actually help you out with GIS here. And that's what these one-pagers really describe because the people in natural resources, they might only care about this one page in the GIS plan, or this might be the main focus of the GIS plan for them. They're not going to want to look at the other 16 roadmaps, for example, but it's a very long document. They can basically take this one page and get what they need out of it.
Yeah, it's very nice.
Also along the lines of excellence, the 2020 annual report that we did called Focus on Burnsville that we released last year, almost a year ago at this time, was done using the story map tool that we're doing this presentation with today. Really nice. It's very interactive. I think it was well received because it did win an award from the Minnesota Association of Government Communications.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And that was really a great effort between communications, myself, and then we had contributions from every department in the city. A lot of time and effort went into it because it was a new way of doing things. But I think in the end, we won the award. It was well received as far as I know. So I think that Raquel actually mentioned that we need to talk about this year. So I think we're doing it again. But it's just a little more engaging than like a typical PDF or something like that because it has all these interactive elements to it where you can play videos and you can have interactive maps and photos. So a little more modern and engaging for the.
Dan
I just
Kay?
connected the dots on what GIS really can do from a publishing tool, because when you said that, and I clicked on the link, obviously this entire presentation is interactive with active links in it. It was the aha moment of that's where the publishing power comes from all that data, pulling together and putting it in an interactive publishable document, or not document, but living thing.
Yes,
right?
you hit the nail on the head there.
I was impressed when City Manager Lee shared this back when it was put out, and I thought it was a great tool. I didn't realize it was GIS that was actually producing it. Right?
Well, exactly, and that kind of goes back to the very beginning of the presentation is that GIS is no longer just a map output.
Yeah.
It's so much more than that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm doing this presentation right here with a GIS tool, and there's not a single map in it.
Yeah,
So that just
the
tells
name
you that
the
it's
name
evolved.
honestly needs to be rebranded. It's really misleading. It makes global satellite, global information satellite system or whatever. You think of GIS, you think of, or even geographic, right? Geographic still spells out map. So, but it's way beyond that.
It is way beyond that. It has grown far, far beyond that. So then the last thing under excellence is just that we really strive to have a city branded and accessible GIS outputs, meaning that I'm working closely with communications to make sure our GIS maps looks like the type of outputs that communications is putting out. We're using the same fonts, same font colors. We want a recognizable Burnsville brand. We don't want someone to come look at our GIS stuff and wonder, am I looking at the city of Burnsville, or is this
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
a consultant put together? So we're really trying to come up with an identity and a brand, and we've made good progress with that. The other thing that we're very conscious of is a maximum accessibility for our users, meaning, users with disabilities should be able to use our GIS products just like everyone else. Esri has come a long ways with what their tools can do in that arena, and we're taking full advantage of that wherever we can. They have tools that work with screen readers now, and we're always thinking about what colors we're using on our maps. We're trying not to use colors that are going to create confusion for people that are colorblind. So that's always a consideration as we do
You're
our
using
design.
the Burnsville colors, blue and green.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. The
Yeah.
challenge a lot is with the red and the greens, because that's the most common type of color vision deficiency. Moving on to the next section of this is innovation. And this is where we talk about community engagement, and this is kind of what we're just saying about how GIS has really morphed out of just maps into so much more. Community engagement is one of the more powerful things that GIS is capable of doing now. There's been a huge proliferation of web tools in GIS and community engagement. We have a lot of interactive maps out there. I'm not going to go through them all. I have a quick little video here rather than trying to do a live demo and falling on my face. I'm going to play this video that is a demonstration of one of our more popular public solutions that we have out there. This is a park and facility finder. This allows people to see all the parks and facilities in Burnsville, interact with the data. It's really pretty neat. We've had this for a while. It's been very well received. So I'll talk over this demo as I play it, but
Is this capability on our website today
Yeah, and it's,
to do what this video is showing me?
and
Yep.
in iCompass, you can
I
click
haven't,
it. We
I
have
guess,
it.
run across it where I could do this kind of interactivity. Maybe I haven't searched for something like this, but
Type in
So our
Burnsville
Bur-
GIS.
Burnsville in Brief, that
Yeah.
monthly report, as well as our annual report integrates this. But this presentation that Chris and Matt put together is on our website.
Is on our website.
Yep, and you should be able to click, and there's a ton of links in there.
yes. And this live demo right here, or not live demo, I should say, but, I mean, this is a live product that we have that
On the website.
is on the website, and there's actually a link in the story map, I think, that would open it up for you.
Yeah.
So, I'll just kind of walk you through this real quick and how this works is, the idea here is that users can come in here, and on this side, they can run different filters to look for the type of activity or facility they want to find. And we change this list based on summer or winter because the activities that people are looking for change based on that. You can zoom into a park. Once you find the park you're looking for, you have a link to get to the Google directions, so you know how to navigate to get there. You can go to the park's main park page on the City of Burnsville website. It lists all the different amenities there. You can open up right from the map the video of the park. We have videos of all these parks. So you can preview a video and decide, hey, yeah, this is a park I want to go check out, or no, maybe this park doesn't have what I thought it was going to have, or, I don't like that playground, I'm going to go find a different one. So really, it's very, what I want to highlight here is it's very interactive in that you can filter by activity, then you can click on any point on the map and get information about it. So if you click on a basketball court, it'll tell you how many courts are there. Is there striping on the court or not striping on the court? You can click on the playground and see a picture of the playground. You can click on hiking trail, which I think is about to happen here, and see how long is the trail, what activities are allowed on the trail, what is the elevation profile of the trail. So really a lot of rich information tied into this data on this map. So this is out there on our featured maps. Here's the trail piece right here. So you can even, if you want to cross-country ski, you might be interested in an elevation profile like this to know what you're getting yourself into before you put on your skis and set out. You can also click on shelters and get to the reservation link on the city's website if you want to go and try and get a reservation. So very, very interactive, powerful tool that also works on mobile devices, so not just on a desktop.
Can I ask a really specific question?
Yeah.
On the Parks and Rec map, where we can see all the stuff you just told us about, I'm wondering why the playgrounds for the schools aren't identified there, but then they are identified on the playground map.
That's a good question. The playground map was one that an intern did.
And on
And
the intern map.
she just happened to include them, and we didn't include them in this one. Do you think they should be included?
It's just an observation.
Yeah.
Because the ball fields are listed there, but not the playground equipment.
Yeah, well, we could definitely
Not gonna
And-
lose any sleep about it.
add those in. I'm gonna go work on it right after this meeting. So right here is where I mentioned that, you know, staff, non-GIS staff are starting to use these solutions to do GIS work, and this is that example. I'm not gonna open it up, but this is that example that Caleb did this story map for restoration efforts in Terrace Oaks Parks, and it came out great. And it's just a perfect example of staff being able to use these tools without any real formal training or background, because they're very intuitive, and I'm here to support them, you know, as they need it when they come calling. GeoSurveys is something else we're doing a lot of right now. Actually, we're working on a project for the winter lighting tour that's coming up here. I think it's not a contest this year like it was last year. It's going to be just register your lighting and your lighting display, and people can drive around the city and look at these. But we've done this numerous times in the past. This is an example of what we did a few years ago to gather some information on proposed bike lane infrastructure. And I'll play this video too, and I may not play this one to the end because I feel like I'm running out of time here. But this just kind of shows you how this form works and how easy it is for a member of the community to come in here and fill out a couple of bits of information. And it's not like your regular Survey Monkey type survey. What's powerful about this is they can actually answer the survey questions, but then when they get to the end, they associate that with a spot on the map. So in this particular case, this is very valuable because we're asking them to tell us about riding bikes in Burnsville, and a lot of that has a geographic component to it as far as what areas are you concerned about, where do you ride, and so forth. So that gives us great intelligence on the staff side to be able to see these survey responses in a map view like this, and then analyze it and be able to make good sense of the feedback we gathered from the community and use that going forward in our decision making. This has been paired with, so this would be what the public would enter this survey information here, and then this is a dashboard application that staff could use to then analyze the survey responses that come in. And this is all interactive, so I'm just showing that this is the point I just put on the map earlier in the video when I took that survey. But then staff can come over here and interact with the data, and even these charts that are on the left side there, that's the you can associate pictures with your survey. But these charts over here on the left are interactive, so as you click on these, you can see the map change, and the responses in the upper left corner also change. So you're filtering your responses based on interacting with the chart, which is pretty neat.
Yeah.
Okay, so just a little bit more on the public-facing maps. Like I mentioned, we have a lot out there. They're popular. We have more than 57,000 views for our top 10 most viewed web map applications. And this part of this presentation just kind of shows you the individual hits for each of these. One thing I'd like to highlight here is just that we have this 2020 winter lighting contest gathered 9,100 views, and that was in a period of like 3 weeks. So some of these have been out here for a year, a couple of years. I still consider that pretty good traffic, especially since we don't really promote a lot of these. People get to these by just kind of finding their way, I think, exploring the website. The winter lighting contest is an example of how much traffic we can get when we get communications involved, and they do some social media promotion of these types of things. The Park and Facility Finder is another example of one where we used communications to really promote the application. But a lot of these other ones have not been promoted at all, and they've just been, I think, found kind of organically by people clicking on the website. So this is how you would get to it from this burnsvillemn.gov, is if you go to Explore and click on Maps, it'll take you out to this page here, which is then our featured maps and apps gallery, and that's where you can find a lot of these and start clicking on these and playing around with them. For internal GIS solutions, we're using this just to make staff aware, data aware for their decision making. It's a great tool for them to share data. Chris mentioned that we have this internal GIS application. It's called Data Link. It has more than 150 GIS layers. So that actually amounts to more than 100,000 mapped features that staff can look at on there. So they're getting great location intelligence by interacting with this tool and being able to see where everything is located in the city. We're also doing a lot of mobile data collection with custom field apps. Both staff and contractors use this. What's really nice is we have contractors using these tools, and we're able to monitor their progress in real time. So we have a contractor that comes into the city every year and does inspections on like 1,300 private fire hydrants. And they use this solution that I created for them, and they bring their own device, so we don't have to provide a device. And it shows them every hydrant they need to go to, so it helps them wayfind to the hydrant. When they get to the hydrant, they tap on it. They fill out a little form that was defined by the fire department as far as what information they want the contractor to collect. And then in real time, fire utilities can monitor these inspections. So they can see the map change, the colors and the symbols on the map change as the contractor marks a hydrant inspected. If they fail a hydrant, it comes up with a big red X, so we know right away the hydrant's been failed and it needs to be dealt with immediately. Obviously, we want our fire hydrants in service. So that has been a really successful example of mobile data collection. And then we also tie that in with an operations dashboard so that that's how we kind of monitor them in real time. It's really great because the contractor knows we're watching them constantly. It brings an extra level of accountability to them. Plus, we used to have to wait weeks to get this data back from them. Now we're getting it the minute they mark a hydrant inspected. We can see that on our side. And we have little widgets here that count down. I have another video here, but I think I'm going to skip it for the sake of time. You can definitely watch it on your own time if you'd like. But it kind of counts down how many hydrants are left. And then when that number goes to 0, we can feel good saying, all right, you guys can leave town. Because in past years, before we were leveraging this technology, we did have cases where we weren't necessarily totally sure. Did they get every hydrant they were supposed to get? And okay, they went back to Indiana, and we still have some hydrants maybe that now we need to go out and inspect. So it wasn't a huge problem, but this eliminates that completely.
So is this what people can use for like adopting a hydrant and that kind of stuff, like residents?
Yes, there are, that is on our work plan, is to come up with like a good, elegant solution for AdoptAHydrant and other things. I think we do have an AdoptAPlanter application out
Yeah.
there right now that Public Works put together. That is another example of public engagement that we're using GIS tools for, where people can go right in and fill out a form and say, I want to adopt this planter, and it goes into staff, and staff still has the opportunity to approve it. So it's not like they can just say, I'm going to adopt it and consider it adopted. But
Because all of
AdoptAHydrant is a very common thing that a lot of other cities do, and I know our fire chief is interested in, so it's definitely on the work plan. We have actually quite a few assets that we're interested in putting an adopt type application together. Another one would be storm drains, where people can
Yeah.
kind of work with us to help us keep those storm drains clean so they work properly, rather than having to call the city out to deal with it. Somebody kind of takes ownership and responsibility for those, and it's right there on the map. So
And we all have
Very
all of our streets that are adopted and our parks that are adopted.
yes, we
So-
have those. We
Yeah,
don't
so
have
the-
like a public-facing application where people can apply to adopt them, but we are showing which ones are adopted
already
in
adopted.
our mapping products.
Is there a way that we would know when the organizations are out there already picking up the trash and everything, so we know that that's done or not?
I think that's kind of just coordinated with Dan and the streets department.
Yeah, because we have to pick up all of the
Yeah, because they come
the
in, I think,
bags,
and
and
get
we all
vests
have
and
to,
like
yeah.
stuff for doing the pickup. I don't think we're tracking digitally anywhere, like when that work is being done or
Okay,
how often it's being done.
okay,
I have a
We certainly could, the
question.
tools are there.
yeah.
Are you working on this now, or can we be working on something like with our permitting group where we're able to pull up a house and we can tell when a permit's been pulled for something? So that
Yes.
we're not trying to call City Hall and say, can someone research this? Because you're trying to sell a house, or maybe in Vince's case, he's trying to insure a house, and he can just pull up and he knows that furnace is 50 years old or that roof is 20 years old. And
Yes, that's part of our new permitting, licensing, code enforcement application that we've just
code
released
compliance?
this year. And
Did
code
you
is,
say code compliance?
code compliance, sorry.
Okay, thanks.
Code compliance. So, yes, that's, and I guess maybe Tom could answer that better than me. I'm not sure where they're at with the public-facing component of the Opengov solution at this point.
Jenny Faulkner has spoke to the new product that we've recently implemented in community development and continue to expand its use. It's a product called Opengov. It's a GIS-centric based product that utilizes the internal geo data set that Matt maintains and our other GIS technicians help maintain. And so it will leverage the GIS data that you're seeing here. In addition, it'll track and be able to publish those activities like permit activity, permit history. Those pieces are being brought online soon.
Oh, great.
And we'll be back.
Okay,
Perfect.
Yeah, and this is a great transition to my next talking point here, because that's GIS Business System Integrations, and the first one here is Opengov, which is a two-way integration where we both send them data, GIS data, that is core to the Opengov solution, mainly the parcel data, because almost every record is tied to a parcel in this solution. And then we also take data back from them so that we can show it on a map. So for example, we can have a map that shows where active permits are, or permits over the last 5 years, and it lights up those properties on the map. So it really gives a nice overview for staff to be able to see that. And the other cool thing about this integration with Opengov is we have they have analysis capabilities built into it. We configure it, but you can click on a property and see, for example, does it intersect with a floodplain? Is it flagged for some other reason, like it has a steep slope issue, or any number of restrictions that might be on the property? So when our staff opens up this Opengov Citizen Service software and they go to a property, in the back end, there's GIS processes going on that's intersecting this property with all this operational GIS data, and then creating these flags, so staff no longer have to go do a bunch of legwork to see, okay, is this in a floodplain, what could be issues with this property? It's all right there for them on a single screen. So we have GIS integrated with 7 different business systems. A lot of them are two-way, some are one-way, where we're just providing GIS data into their solution. And even with utility billing, that's one way, where it's a one-way integration where we're just taking in data from utility billing, and we show that in that data link application for our staff. Down to my last section here, I appreciate your patience, is collaboration. First item here is we have a GIS Steering Committee. This was formed in 2016. This is kind of when our GIS momentum took a big jump at the organization. The point of the GIS Steering Committee is just to make sure that GIS resources are being distributed equitably through the organization, to hold me accountable for the work that I say I'm going to do, to provide guidance and governance as needed. We meet 4 times per year. These are the folks that are currently on that GIS Steering Committee. We actually have our final meeting of 2021 next week, I believe, but I won't read all their names, but the takeaway here is that you can see they're from all different departments. So we have great representation from all the departments, and that's intentional. So I value those folks and the contributions they make to the GIS landscape here. Another thing we do, and this is something that I work on with the steering committee is we have recurring citywide GIS meetings. The point of these meetings is to make staff aware of GIS capabilities, maybe give them some ideas on how they could leverage GIS to help them do their jobs, maybe better, faster, safer, and also just to keep up with the emerging technology as it's always changing. So this is another one of those meetings that's been a little thrown off by COVID-19, but we'll definitely be reinstating these, hopefully in person, in 2022. And then my last talking points here are GIS Project Collaboration. Some recently completed projects are park kiosk signs. We put up some really nice kiosks at Terrace Oaks East and West in Alamagnet Park recently, and that was a collaborative effort between GIS, Parks, Rec, Communications, and Natural Resources. We also recently put out a Discover Your Community Parks booklet. That's a hard copy booklet that's on the wall over there. Came out really nice, and one thing I'll say with all these outputs is if you look at them, you'll see this consistent brand that I mentioned before. We put a lot of energy into making sure that we had this consistent brand across these maps. So that was a collaboration between GIS, Recreation, and Communications. I kind of talked about the private hydrant inspections already. That's an annual project that is a collaboration between GIS, Utilities, Fire Department, and a contractor. The Opengov GIS integration, we've also talked about that, but it's a collaborative effort between GIS, IT, with the application services, and community development. Something that we are releasing right now is an advanced parcel and demographic explorer, and that was a effort between GIS, community development, and Dakota County, actually, because Dakota County is the keeper of the parcel data, and we have a relationship with them that allows us to acquire that data from them once per week. And then Grow Burnsville Site Selection Analysis. This was a really fun project for me because I got to do some really nerdy GIS stuff with this one. But basically with that, we had to figure out, okay, we've got this grant, we're going to put these gardens in and these food forests, where can we put them in? So we had a lot of limiting factors there that we had to analyze. But really what happened was, we started out with 354 total eligible sites, and through using GIS analysis and looking at relationships between environmental constraints like available land size, the underlying soils, locations of steep slopes, where there are existing structures, even sun exposure, we're able to narrow it down from 354 eligible sites to the top 10 sites. Wow. And then
Impressive.
I presented those top 10 sites to the Grow Burnsville team, and I believe they used their local knowledge plus also site visits to kind of determine the final ones, and all the sites we selected were within the top 10 final ones that we identified with the GIS exercise. So here's just a picture of what the Terrace Oaks kiosks look like. Nice trail maps, winter and a summer version, because things are a little bit different out there from hiking season to cross-country ski season. There's also some other content over here that's not maps, but that's where natural resources and communications came in. This is a picture of that Discover Your Community Parks booklet that's on the wall out there for people to take. Again, the consistent branding there. It's a really nice kind of slightly larger than pocket-sized book that someone can take out into the community and really go explore the community parks. We have a couple of projects in development here. They're also going to be good collaborations between departments. We have a neighborhood info finder that we're hopefully going to be releasing here in Q1 2022. This would be an interactive map for staff and the public to basically look up a property and find out specific information such as elected officials, city services, like what day is their garbage day, what school would their kids go to, who are utility providers. A lot of information that we have out there now, but in a variety of different maps that people have to go to, or ultimately they end up just calling the city and asking these questions. If we can provide a really nice self-service tool for them, it can save staff time, because these people can get these, our community members can get the answers to these questions 24/7 when it's convenient for them, and it saves us staff time. So the goal would be that they could look this up in the map, generate a nice one-page printout they could stick on their fridge or inside their kitchen cabinet or wherever they might want that has a nice summary of all this information for them. I think that the real estate industry might enjoy that quite a bit too. I know that we're kind of trying to replicate something Brooklyn Park has done. That's a very popular application that they have that I know the realtors really like. Natural resources, this isn't quite as exciting as the neighborhood finder, but this is a good internal solution that's going to save natural resources a lot of time and energy. They have kind of an antiquated paper-based solution right now where they go out and collect photos and data on restoration areas. By turning this into a digital GIS process, we can cut down the amount of time it takes to do this work and also get better data in the end. So it's a win-win, and we're hoping to have that live for their 2022 field season in the spring. Winter lighting displays, I already hit on. This would be a collaboration between GIS Communications and Community Development. That's going to be coming up here very soon. This is what I was actually working on earlier today. And that's a GeoSurvey, again, where someone self-registers their lighting display. They answer a few questions, they drop their point on the map, and then what we provide in the end is a tour map that's interactive that members of the community or members from outside the community can come in and say, yeah, I'd love to drive around and go see all these cool lighting displays. They can click on the display, see a picture of it if the person submit a picture when they registered, and then also get driving directions from one display to the next using Google driving directions. And then lastly, before I close, we are going to be doing a Grow Burnsville story map hopefully before the end of the year here, because we kind of want to summarize the success of this program, show how we've come from receiving the grant all the way to where we are now through building the facilities and even having our first harvest. And I know that Sue in sustainability has been collecting a lot of great media, I think some drone imagery and pictures, and we should have some really, really nice interactive pieces that we can incorporate with that, and that should be live in December or by the end of the year. So that's all we prepared. If you have any other questions.
Yeah, I do. So you touched on sustainability, and one of the questions that I have to do with perhaps a dashboard or a storyboard as we continue on all of the objectives that we have and how we're doing with all of that, and how the public will find out what we're doing in different areas in accomplishing any of those goals and objectives, so that it's internal but also external.
Yeah, I think a great opportunity for doing something like that and presenting like key performance indicators or something would be tying it in with the monthly reports that we're doing. I think they're monthly.
Yep.
Yeah.
To the community that's kind of highlighting everything that's going on in the city. I could see an opportunity to incorporate something like that, or it could be a standalone product, but then also like embedded within those types of reports.
Yeah, because I have a CEO roundtable, and so those are the companies within our our city. And one of the things is that we're going to try and collect what all of the different companies are doing with regard to their sustainability efforts. And how can we look at it collectively as a city and say, here's what Burnsville is doing. Not just what the city is doing, but what is the community doing with regard to taking care of the environment and energy efficiency. We know what Excel Energy did at Black Dog when they converted to combined cycle and had the last coal train come in, and what they did with regard to reducing their greenhouse gas on their property. So what happens when we incorporate what they're doing into what we're doing, and what would that look like? And especially with what we're doing with more electric chargers around the city for automobiles. So what does that mean also when we find out how many more electric automobiles are being used in the city, because more and more you see people purchasing
Oh, definitely.
electric, yeah.
That's actually
Or
one of the things
hybrids.
we want to include in the neighborhood app is where's the closest electric car charging station. But
Yeah.
I would say, certainly we can do that type of stuff. The biggest challenge to that is probably just getting the data.
Well,
If we
and
have the
that's
data,
just
the
it.
possibilities are endless.
Yeah. So my next question is, you have a strategic plan, and your strategic plan is just GIS.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, Tom, there's a IT, yeah, come to the table. Yeah, because strategically, as I think about, because we've been getting a lot of information, 2022, we're going to have the upgrade for City Hall and also for Fire Station 2, right? That's a lot of work. Now, I know when you all were pulling cables back in the 90s, late 90s, I don't think you're pulling cable anymore. I think you're having somebody
we're
do that,
outsourcing.
especially with Fire Station 1. You could, when I went there the first time and you see miles and miles of cables, I think, oh my God. So, as you look to the future with all of this, my hope is that all of you are putting staffing plans in place, because I'm listening to all of this and I know what's coming down the pipeline. And I know what happened during the pandemic, and you had to equip everybody who were going to be working remotely. And so I know you guys worked overtime for all of that. So I'm hoping to see a plan on what all of this is, and with all the work that's on your plate coming up here.
Madam Mayor, to that point, we're busy, and part of that, going forward, we are planning to develop a comprehensive strategic plan for IT as it relates to all of our activities throughout the organization and how we impact all the operations and business units within the organization. And the key there, too, is also to align it to the other strategic plans that have been developed or are in place. GIS is one example of that. There's been a lot of success out of that specific program based out of a GIS strategic plan that was initially developed, as Matt indicated, in 2016 and has been updated in 2020. And we believe that that's also going to help our future efforts as it relates to IT initiatives and resources and funding of projects that need to go forward. So we expect to begin that early in 2022 and have a GIS strategic plan in place to move forward on.
By May, because we start looking at the budget.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, Tom and I have talked about timing on that plan, and I think that we'll be able to start it first part of the year, and it's my hope that it will be ready by the time that we get into the initial part of the budgeting process, barring any unforeseen circumstances.
Thank you, Greg. That would be, to you, Melanie and Tom, that would be helpful. I mean, because this is really terrific, and there's so much going on in the city, and I have to thank all of you for the work that you're doing, because the information you have is now accessible to our residents and businesses, and they can make decisions as well. And then our internal staff is making decisions. So a lot of this is within your domain of activities, right? And you're servicing all of the other business units within the organization. Yeah. And so it's important for us to understand all the things that you're doing and what your needs are, because our job is to make sure that you have the resources that you need to meet the expectations of our residents and our businesses. Okay, Kara?
So one of our residents has a question. Are you also working with the school district in this, or is this, they're their own entity, therefore you're not really coordinating with the school district?
Correct. At this time, Some of our fiber coexists with the school district, but that's about it. Right now, this is just city-centric items.
Got it, thank you.
And that's the reason why we continue to work collaboratively with the school district, with the superintendent and the board chair. And Melanie does a nice job of working with Dr. Battle. And also our communications department. And weren't we at one time, Tom, helping them with regard to their IT needs, especially with their meetings and so forth?
We still actively collaborate with the school district on a regular basis as it relates to public television broadcasts for their school board meetings. The liaison office that we maintain at the high school, along with the BCTV studio that is maintained at the high school. And then we collaborate with them on their networking needs and our networking needs as it relates to different fiber initiatives that we have in common.
Yeah.
So we do have an active relationship with the school district staff at that level.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah,
And I'll add one thing onto that, just from a GIS standpoint, we aren't working like hand in hand with the school district on any projects, but we do have maps out there that show the different school district boundaries and the different school-specific boundaries, so you can kind of look up your property and see
Yeah.
where your kids would go to school or your neighbor's kids.
because at the beginning, you talked about identifying all of the product mix within our community. So you would have all of the schools identified. You
Yes.
talked about you have the library identified. So in that, my assumption was you also have all of the school assets identified.
We have the school buildings mapped.
Elementary schools, the high school, the middle school, what's their, the boundary within each of their properties, so people know.
We have structures and property lines. That information
Yeah.
is categorized, and how that feeds into the larger school districts as far as boundaries. We don't have any of their, I'll say, infrastructure
No.
mapped at this point.
Well, that's something they have to share with you, and again, that's getting data from them so that it can be,
Well, and I will say that
Input.
our fire department is proactive in going out and doing fire pre-plans. So they go out to buildings, apartment buildings and schools, for example, and they actually use GIS technology to go out and GPS where is the entrance to the building, where is the key box,
Yeah.
where is the gas meter. There's dozens of features of interest to them so they intimately know the building before they have to go there and respond to a situation. So that would be an example of where we would have some data on schools, emergency type plan
I remember-
documents and.
I remember at one time, fire needed to know how many entrances into a building, so where's the most expeditious entrance if there was an incident that they can access? And so my guess is that you would have all of that identified for them, so they know when they pull it up as they're going to a call, they know exactly where to go.
Yes,
the
we've been working
closest.
in that direction. And police and fire both kind of have their pre-planned type things for these situations. And the way they used to generate those before this technology was widely available was a really painfully manual process that was almost an impediment to them being able to do it. We've improved on that with GIS, and now there's some consumer off-the-shelf products that they're looking at that's probably going to make it maybe even a little bit easier for them to do it. But they used to have to basically go out there and hand draw it all out and then come back and take an aerial picture of the site and then like use a PDF editor or something to mark it all up with text. And now they go out there with an iPad and they stand at the front door and they hit a button and they say, I'm putting the front door here, I'm putting the key box here, and not only that, but I'm putting the contact information for who has access to this key box, and then I'm going a step further and I'm marking the fire alarm and the emergency exits and how wide is the exit and lots of levels of information.
Well, that's very good for our residents to know, and our businesses to know, that that's all been identified. So when an incident occurs, they know that the responders, the
Yes,
first responders.
I would say it's a
we'll
work
know
in
exactly.
progress. It's not all identified throughout the city, but the fire chief, I think, is prioritizing structures, and they are actively working on collecting that information and building out a really nice database for these private buildings, so that when they're called to respond, they pull it up on their computer on the way there, and
Yeah.
they've got an operating picture before they ever step foot in the building or even get out of the trucks.
Good. Well, Melanie, Greg, Tom, Matt, and Chris, this is really great information, and it's really nice that, people can access and stream this when they want to understand more about what's going on. So thank you very much. Well done. It was in just going through the background and clicking on all of the items that you had identified where you can access and the different links. That was really, it was very interesting and dynamic.
I encourage you to take it for a test drive and let me know if you have any feedback.
Yeah, okay. Nicely done. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry we went over the time.
Thanks.
Appreciate
Well,
your patience.
no problem. This
Well
is, okay.
It was our questions that did
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, this is what we need. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, we have the, single family and multifamily residential zoning district changes. And presenting this evening is Regina Dean, our Assistant Community Development Director, and Kim Lindquist with WSB. So welcome, Regina and Kim.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay.
Start in just a second.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council.
Yeah, because I saw, the background said Eric, and I thought, and Kim, well, that doesn't look
I am
like
not Eric, if there was any need to clarify.
Mistake on my part. I apologize for that. Yes, we do have Kim Lindquist with WSB. Since November of 2021, WSB has been working with the city on the zoning code update and also our subdivision ordinance update as well. And that's separate from the full city code process that's also underway by the task force. As far as the work that's been done so far, we've done public outreach and reviewed red line drafts with our planning commission. So Kim's going to get into the details about that. As a reminder to folks, the planning commission is the advisory body to the city council on zoning and land use matters. So that's why it's a separate process from that full city code update. But I will kick it off to Kim. At the end, we do have some very specific questions that have come up between the time that the last red line ordinance went to planning commission to date that we want to get some city council consensus on before we move forward. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim. Certainly, if there's any questions along the way, I'd be more than happy to answer.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Welcome,
great.
Kim.
Well, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. I had mentioned this at the Planning Commission. I used to work in Rosemont for 17 years. So I just started at WSB about 6 months ago. So it's kind of fun to come back down to Dakota County. So,
Was Mayor Drosty there 17 years ago?
yes, he was. He outlasted me. So.
Pushing 40 years now.
So anyhow, today we're going to talk about the residential districts for the update. And we chose those first, I think, from a public engagement process we thought makes sense. It's the districts that most affect your residents. If anybody's going to get excited about some of the changes in the zoning ordinance, it's probably the ones that affect their property. So we started and looked at all of the residential chapters. They're chapters 12 through 18. It covers the single-family, duplex, multifamily, the manufactured home, and then also the minimum requirements. So as we mentioned, there's kind of 5 things we want to briefly cover tonight. The public process, general observations, highlight of public comments, proposed changes, and then your final discussion and direction. So from a public engagement standpoint, I can tell you that most people don't get too excited when you tell me you're going to talk about zoning ordinances. So we've tried a couple different approaches to maybe garner at least some public interest regarding the changes in the ordinance. We have a separate website where we're posting all the drafts so that people can go to there. We've also indicated on the website any public engagement events that we would be having. We had the staff had provided information cards that listed the website at a couple of events, like they handed them out at Night to Unite, and also the Back to the 80s, so we could try to get the word out that the city's looking at the zoning ordinance as well as your code updates. We had these public events that WSB attended. I'll get back to that in a second. And probably the main one is this residential preference survey. And so that was a, not quite maybe what you would typically think for a survey. We didn't say, do you like code number 7, blah, blah, blah. What we did is try to do a visual preference survey and then try, ask questions that would ultimately lead to potential modifications in an ordinance. And so what we did with the survey was, along with posting it on the website and, getting those links out, we also were at the party on the plaza, and we had people take the survey at that event and got probably about 30 additional survey respondents through that. And then we also were at the fire muster where the survey had ended by then, but we did have some, at least information from the survey and also some information about the zoning. So I think we tried maybe a couple of different approaches, again, because zoning ordinances may not be kind of the cat's meow right off the bat. And so what we've got here is the survey, which I know is also in your packet, so I'm not sure we need to go through it question by question, but I'm more than happy to just briefly mention them and if there's any questions. So the first one, we just wanted to kind of start out with, what do you value about the community, your street or neighborhood? And so we listed some things that, again, could harken back to zoning criteria, houses set back from the road, the amount of trees or vegetation, the size of your properties, things that, we could at least get back into the zoning. Then we also asked, what do you, in addition to what you value, what would you like to see changed? So that, again, if we thought there was something really compelling, we would be able to address that in the zoning code. We also talked about and tried to, again, use photos. So you look at these photos and then the question is this enough, too much, or just right in terms of backyard open space? And then we also have another that really is just in the front yard. Again, is it a hard surface question? Is it
Kara
open
has
space?
a question
Yep.
before you.
So the phrasing of the question makes it appear you're going to require people to have mostly hard cover in their backyard. Because when you ask how much green space should the code require for a single-family backyard lot, and then the options is require people to have mostly green space, require people to have a mix, or require people to have mostly hard cover. So if I were going to look at that question and the answers, I would be assuming if I picked C, I would be writing into the city code requiring people to have mostly hard cover. Or if I picked B, I would be requiring my neighbor to have a mixture. So like that question and the next question, I don't know, I'm concerned about the wording on that. I like the pictures, and I like how you set that up with like the visual representations, because a lot of people are like, I don't know what you mean by that.
Right.
But how that says, should the code require you? I have a question on that, so, because
Yeah.
how much should
I
you
do
require?
understand. I think, though, we also want to make sure
Yeah.
that we convey that this is a regulatory process, and so if people were really feeling strongly, there would be something that could potentially come out of it. I think ultimately, if you look at the responses, everybody really landed in the middle. And so the real conclusion, and maybe it isn't worded as well as could be, was that really you're doing fine as is, and that we really didn't need to modify that, because we had talked about, at least internally,
Right.
about maybe having like a hard surface requirement, to limit it, and what it really resulted in is some people liked a little, some people liked a lot, and most of them just kind of went to the center and said, yeah, this is about normal, this is fine. And so there really wasn't any conclusion that you could draw from that in any way would make you think it should be modified from the current condition.
It-
Okay, well, and, yeah, and I do see what you're saying, and I know you're gonna present the results, so I'll
Yeah,
wait for results, but
So when
I do understand your comments, and that's
So
something
when
we need
I
to be
looked
aware
at
of.
that, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to put into the ordinance that they're going to require to put hard surface. That these are options. So what you're going to be doing with regard to your backyard setbacks, you can either have or not have, but it's not requiring you to have that. But it is that, so if you're going to have like backyard B, that you know what that would look like, or backyard C, the density of that, those amenities. So, but it's not about requiring, but it is, these are things that they can think about.
And I think that's something going forward as we're looking at in the future doing the business and industrial type survey, that we're more cautious on that wording of saying
Because, yeah,
option instead of required.
Yeah.
Being
Yep.
cognizant of that.
Yep.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah,
right,
because,
yeah, I mean, it's just,
because the ordinance isn't going to say, this is what you must have.
we'll ask them.
right,
You know.
right,
So the word, so when
Yeah.
I was reading through that, it wasn't,
Right.
that the ordinance would read that that's what you have to do. You have a home, that's what you have to do.
Right, no, and I only questioned it just because it says, how much should the code require? And once you say how much should the code require, that's very regulatory.
Yeah.
That's saying you must, right? Or you can't. You must or you can't.
Yep.
Because that's how codes read,
Yep.
So,
Yep,
and that
I
would be
agree
my
with
only
you.
feedback
Yep.
on that question.
Okay, great, yep, well,
Could I ask one
Yeah,
question?
yep,
What was the
Dan
purpose of
Kay.
asking that question?
I'm sorry.
What was the purpose of asking that question?
It
It's a
really
very
was,
broad
you're
question.
a community that doesn't have a hard surface requirement, for example, which is, I think, unusual. Most people have an upper limit on the amount of hard surfacing that residential can have, and you don't. So you have setbacks that kind of get you there, but it's amazing how people end up doing something that you don't anticipate. I mean, that just happens. And so there was
Someone's
some.
like, I don't wanna mow, I'm paving the whole sucker.
Right.
Yeah.
Or I have to have a surface for my vehicles, so I'm going to throw a ton of gravel or
Yeah.
pave a bunch of my front yard so I can have my cars.
Like a Japanese Zen garden or.
So, I think it was a valid exercise, regardless of the wording, because that is something that came up, like, well, this at least kind of furthers the box about what people can develop on their site. But it didn't appear that people felt really
Don't
strongly
really
about
care,
it.
it seems
Right.
like, okay.
Correct. And it seems to be working, I think, when you see the other responses. People are, the ultimate conclusion I arrived at with the survey is people are pretty happy with the development pattern in Burnsville. Either because they moved here because of the existing development pattern, or because they were part of it and they enjoy it. And so they expect, they're kind of coming to expect what you already have, and they like that. And so there wasn't really a lot of, oh my gosh, we need to fix something or change something. In fact, just the opposite, and people were quite happy. So the next drawing is about car storage options, and again, the requiring of two enclosed, but, how do people feel about just driveway parking or carports, which tend to be a little bit iffy, or even more and more you see three-car garage. So that was the question, getting at that. The next issue was just the oversized garage in terms of that height or size. I think also the question always is just kind of the dominance of garage, and that gets at that a little bit too by the photos, even though it's more about the oversizing.
Yeah, that whole thing about garage doors and when houses were built, one of the things that we talked about in the mid-90s was that garage doors now became the focal point, and it wasn't outward facing to the community. And so people came home, drove into the garage, and went to the back and not engaged with their neighbors. So we talked about when we were doing the Partnership for Tomorrow and Neighborhoods was very important. A lot of the things that came out of that is that how can we bring people back to the front and then change some of our setbacks so that they can build verandas and so that they can use that space where it's not just predominantly these big garage doors, 2 and 3 garage doors, and there was nothing else.
Right.
So all you saw were garage doors, and so we made some adjustments to the setbacks so that people can build front porches and have an outward facing to be more neighborly, and rather than going to the back of their house, and they didn't even know their neighbors.
Yeah, so you have a little more activity potentially in the front.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and that came up often with several times with the planning
Yeah.
commission.
A lot of
This is
people
an
want to
exception.
engage with their neighbors, and they can't do that if they are backward facing rather
Right.
than frontward
Right.
facing.
Right.
Is that something that
Great.
we could do? Let me just.
So we've got the garage issue, and then just some of the latter questions related to driveway width. And so that's
next.
another example where the city requires, or the city max is 24, but we listed 24, 30, 32, all of the above, none, in terms of your preference. I think there's a certain contingency where everybody likes more, but the answer really ended up being 24. People are happy with the existing, they think it makes sense, it works for them. People said more or less, but I mean, the 24 was just fine. And then I think the one thing that I think is kind of interesting were these last several questions about how long do you anticipate staying in your residence?
I like that.
Do you, in the next 5 years, do you plan on doing improvements? And if you couldn't do the improvement, would you stay? And then also, if you've experienced any permitting in the past so long, what's your experience, and can you tell us? And of course, most people hadn't experienced it, but, it was still, I think, a worthwhile exercise. And so I always start talking with my hands and then I forget to move forward. So here's the survey results, and you'll see we had 205 respondents, which again, I think is a really good number. This is, not like the city surveys where they go out and call people and it's pretty assertive about, trying to reach people. This was literally, they had to go to the website and they had to go in, so they had to actively do that. And I think 200 is a pretty good number. I've done other surveys and not nearly as good. So there were a total of 11 questions, and here are the results. So how do you feel about your current neighborhood? What do you like about it? The highest thing was the amount of trees and natural vegetation, proximity to parks and sidewalks are close, the residents appear to care about their property, each person has enough space. So, again, these are ideas about that hard surface coverage, about the setbacks, about having the space on your site. Not that we're requiring people to landscape, but if you have enough open space on your property that allows those things, the landscape space, the natural vegetation. And of course, some of them aren't necessarily maybe, as relative if you look at the other thoughts about some of those ideas, close proximity to parks or open space. That's a little bit more of, not the zoning ordinance, but more just your whole development plan. And so, but I think that was a good theme, is just that ability to have some privacy, but also that you have a good amount of space on your property to do some of the things you want to do. So then the next question was what you'd like to see changed. And again, these are much less related to zoning ordinance, but it does maybe, the issue about code enforcement comes up a bit in this, and I don't know if it's because they're talking about houses and, their neighborhood. So, one of the themes on this page, you have these kind of, if you could put them in buckets, there were kind of 5 buckets. And so it was speed limits, no overnight parking, more trees and green space, neighbors had better, wish they had cleaned up their yards better, and more sidewalks and paths. And so those were, again, a lot of the other ones were crime, bike trails, noise, litter, things that weren't maybe always directly related to where we were headed with the zoning ordinance. Then we talked about, we had mentioned about the single family for the hard surfacing kind of idea, or green space in the front and back. So you got 52 on average, or 46. So basically it's 50-50, and people were fine with that middle category. So again, I don't know if that's the people have tendency to go to the middle or they liked it. I think it's pretty consistent with what your development pattern is, so it makes a fair amount of sense. The next, I got 2 on the same. So the next response is related to your car storage areas. And if you look at that, the number 1 response is a 2-car garage, closely followed by a 3-car. But even, driveways and carports, well, I guess not carports so much, but driveways. So I think people are fairly tolerant about the idea of where people are putting their cars. And again, it was just trying to get a better handle on the comfort people have about some of those other options. Same with the oversized garage. We didn't really know, so we had that middle category. You neither approve nor disapprove, which is kind of that neutral, which was the number 1. But if you look at between kind of ambivalent and approve, you're slightly over 50%. You're almost at 60%. So, food for thought. We didn't really get too much into
What's interesting, it's consistent. The carport, there's a big no.
Mm-hmm.
And that was also back in the 90s. Yeah, this is Minnesota.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think many people think of doing that. I think my experience has been more that people get those temporary ones in the winter to slide like a boat in or something, just to keep the snow off of them, which is a whole building code issue because of the temporary structure. And
But that hasn't changed much. I mean, a lot of people said, no
right,
carports.
right, exactly.
And it's consistent today in
Right. So,
the 21st century.
Then we've got with the driveways, you'll see 33% are on the 24, and then you've got 27% that have no preference and 19% that have all of above. So really,
They don't care.
we didn't really bother looking at switching that. I mean, it just didn't seem. And then this one, we have 204 of the respondents about, do you anticipate staying in your current residence? And it was really, like, if you look at it, it's pretty evenly split with each one of those, which is kind of interesting. But you've got, most of them are well over the 6 years, are planning on staying.
Well, actually, when you look at the how long will you stay, the 16 to 20 year and 20 year, that you look at those 2 graphs, and that really says how many people really like living here, and that will continue when you say 16 to 20 or 20
Right.
plus.
But even if you do 6 to 10 and up,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
the amount that are only in the 0 to 5 is 15%. I mean, it's a really small amount.
Yeah. The people who said that they
Yeah.
will leave, but the
They're
rest
just
of
kind
them.
of settled in and enjoying the ride. Oh. Okay, so then we've got the question about if you plan on doing any, improvement to your
Yeah.
property in the next 5 years. A new driveway was 43%, so that was the highest, a deck at 35, which is pretty typical, particularly because of the age of them. And then, if you couldn't accomplish them, would you stay? Most people said yes, a few said no, and then we had a bunch that said it's not applicable because not everyone had automatically assumed they were going to do something in the next 5 years. And then if you had completed any construction, that required a permit, what's your process? And so these numbers were very small. It says 179 responses, but it people could have multiple permits. It wasn't necessarily a singular person. We just couldn't do that in the process. But we did ask if there was anything that we could change. And I think these are things that we've talked about and we'll be looking at more in the process section, but, they want it streamlined, people want online process when possible, which I think almost every community is trying to do. They want to, sometimes the standards are difficult to address in existing development. And I think Burnsville has some zoning exceptions that we spent some time talking about at the Planning Commission that really help existing homes to some flexibility. So if you want to live in your home and the times change in terms of what's good for your home, like adding a patio in the front, the exception allows you to do that. And so I think some of those things built in your single family allow people to kind of age in place and still be able to remodel and keep up to date with maybe some of the the more current building trends, I guess. The city doesn't offer surveying services, so they had to do their own. That's really good. You guys don't want to do that. The permitting, again, about a link on the page, consistent enforcement, permits seem appropriate, and then one person would like to get rid of permits altogether,
Yes. Sorry.
which I think some other people feel that way too. But, so we did that survey and used some of that information, although, as I mentioned, people seemed just on the whole relatively happy, so it wasn't like there were these glaring things that seemed to need to be addressed. And so a lot of what came out originally was the WSB did a red line and gave it to staff, and so that was the first run at it, was the staff WSB red line. Then that was posted on the website, and so public could comment, as well as sending it out to your commissioners in the various groups for their comments. Then those were received, then that was amended again, and then it went to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission saw those comments. So there's really been kind of a vetting process by several groups, some who maybe are more informed about zoning ordinances or think about them more, like the Planning Commission, and then just the general public that might have just stumbled on the drafts and were interested. So we've got a bunch of general observations, but I do want to call out the paragraph in Regina's memo, just to highlight probably the main changes. And if you can keep that in the back of your mind when we talk about some of these general observations, those are drilled down a little bit more. So the goals of all of this, as you all know, is to make the ordinance more clear, more concise, both for your public and the user, but also for the staff, so that it can be equally applied and is clear for everyone concerned during the permitting process, as well as the idea of trying to make it more inclusive and equitable. We've looked at that, and there's been a goal about trying to get more consistent language and terminology in chapters, structure versus building, unit versus family, just those types of things, just so that there's that continuity in all the zoning ordinance. Another area that was recommended was that we produce a use table. So rather than you have to go to the R1 district and see the uses, and then maybe go to the R2, and they might have some additional uses, and often ordinances say, and the ones in R1, and then you have to fold back. What we talked about, and which is in your voluminous attachments, is a use table. So at a glance, you could say, I'm looking at a R2 and I'm going down, and here's my, my permitted uses, my conditional uses, and my interim uses. So it's a
GIS
quicker.
can help you guys with all of that, with all of the functionalities that they just reported to us.
Right.
I
So
mean,
it's
that
a
would make it
quicker-
very highly interactive with the applicants.
Yep, so it's a quicker eye than, kind of paging through
Sure.
an ordinance. We also did it on a dimensional requirement, so your setbacks and your lot sizes. So if you're a resident, you come in and you say, I'm an R1, and there's a sheet that says your front yard, your side yard, your rear yard, and, rather than kind of paging through the ordinance. Just because I think, we use ordinances a fair amount, but if you're not very well versed in it, it seems very confusing.
Yeah.
So that's another thing we looked at. As I mentioned before, the exceptions for the front, side, and rear yard setbacks that in the R1 and the R1A, I think those are really important. They were in there before. There was some fine tuning that the Planning Commission had talked about. And I think those are the things that really help people update their homes to be more relevant to, whatever the newest thing is. Patios in the front, or screening in porches that used to be decks, or things like that. And that flexibility allows them, because so often the houses were built with the setbacks in mind, and so there isn't a lot of extra flex, because of where the house is sitting.
Well, I
Another-
think with what we just heard tonight, Greg, with the GIS system, with an interactive, as you're communicating when they come in for a permit and they've got all of this, I mean, it can be highly interactive with regard to pulling down what that would look like.
Right, the table.
Yeah, and then, what's the permit? Is it a conditional use? Is it a PUD? Whatever that would be.
Right,
And then
yeah.
what are
I
the
mean, you
steps
should
that
be
they
able
have to
link
go
it
through? I mean,
to the application,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, like you'd have the table and it'd be like
Yeah.
conditional uses, and then you could click it and that would take you to the application
and
presumably.
it'll also give you some visuals about what that would be like. So it's user-friendly, because that's what they want. It's something that is streamlined and easy for them to do, so,
Definitely, with the R1 zoning district and even the R1A, I think a lot of that information can be connected with our property information or some of our systems, Opengov, for example. As we get into the business and industrial, that might get a little more tangled of a web, just because there are so many plan unit developments with recorded agreements, and it can be additional information to sift through. It would just be a longer, more intense process to get that information accessible for the public. But
yeah.
I think for R1, R1A, it's something that can be
But it
a lot
appears
easier.
that we do have the technology for that.
just about anything can be done.
Yeah,
Yep. It's just a matter of time and resources.
that's right.
With that manpower part.
That's exactly it, We have the technology, but technology needs people.
So just a couple other things I want to briefly run through, and then we can talk about these observations, is we spent a bit of time talking about elimination of basements or cellar requirements, flexibility about allowing flat roofs, and then we did some restructuring for your districts. So what's before you tonight is R1, R1A, which are generally the same as what you saw with the red lines. Then the R2 has been combined with the R3A. So before the R2 was just duplexes, now it's been combined duplexes and townhomes. So it's kind of that medium density designation in terms of like your comp plan, if you think about that. And then the R3B has just become the straight R3, and that's like the high density. So you've got a low, medium, and high, and then you've got We're looking at the R3D, which was the manufacturing home, just renaming to an R4. So now, instead of having those A's and B's type of thing, you've just got a 1, 2, 3, and 4, which makes sense in my brain, but I'm not used to it as much. And then we've got some language for architectural standards. So I just want to call those out. And now I'm going to end up going over my allotted time too. But we'll talk about these general observations, and if anybody has any particular comments, I'd love to hear them. We've got the R1 and R1A affect most of your existing residents, and the survey indicates people are quite happy with your resulting development pattern. Some of the minimum requirements may reduce building flexibility, and I think that's why those exceptions might want to keep in the back of their mind if they start to see some other needs by the community. Additional accessory uses should be listed to reflect household changes since the last writing, and you'll see that in some of the ordinances. You know, things that are now much more commonplace, trampolines, for example, weren't really listed, and so we've always got that issue if it's not expressly permitted, is it prohibited? Let's be clear, let's make sure that people know. The exceptions to setbacks allow the residents to update their home and stay within the community. Building materials have changed over time and certain types have been more accepted, and that prompted some conversations just about metal and what that can look like, and even some of what is considered high-quality materials has really changed from, a couple decades ago where it was like stone and brick or that's it, and so now there's just so many more materials out there. The current ordinance provides information to the reader, but at times seems too complex and confusing. Zoning is never going to be easy if you don't do it all the time, so I think that is going to be the case, but I think things like the table and clarifying and using that same terminology consistently through the ordinance will at least help people feel more comfortable about it, and hopefully they can at least understand what the point of the regulation is. So again, we talked about providing a use table for easier access. Many of the R2 minimum requirements, driveway, garages, trash, are also regulated elsewhere. That's in a coming up discussion we have on Chapter 7, where a lot of these standards are kind of in this catch-all chapter. R2 lot and unit standards are listed as a total of both units, while often existing duplexes have 0 lot lines. And that is something often they aren't split. I think people before used to buy 2 and live in one and rent out, but now so often I think they are separate ownership. So that is a little different. Within the R2, only duplex buildings were allowed, and so that modification we're talking about ties the duplex more closely with the townhome type. And within the R3B, only duplex and townhomes were permitted uses. So, just a couple more, because we thought about this a lot, and we all had observations. Multiple family attached units are allowed as conditional uses in the R3B, and so what we'd be looking at is that R3 being that higher density now. Apartments are a term of ownership, not a type of unit. The R3B is only residential district with additional setbacks of 1.5 the building height. And that, again, is because of the type of building that was in there. Provision limiting the horizontal length of a building can result in unintended consequences. There are ways to mitigate facade length, and PUDs are generally encouraged, it appears, when there were multiple buildings or more than 10 units. And so maybe also some of this regulation won't always encourage a PUD by having that higher density sitting in the R3. That way or not. So we also received, the next page I'm on is about the project website. I don't know if you guys, I feel like kind of silly reading all these to you, but these were the comments that we ended up sending to the Planning Commission. So rooming houses, we talked briefly about it at the Planning Commission.
What does that mean?
Well, they wanted it like the old-time rooming house where they had a person and a bunch of boarders. We kind of nailed it down.
Right now, people can rent within a house.
Yeah, Because
Well,
now
these
we
are
just
houses
kind
that
of
you
talked
rented a
more
lot
about
of
the,
rooms. Or several rooms on a floor.
yeah.
Minneapolis had a lot of those when I was growing up.
We didn't really.
So it's like an apartment, but now it's
So
in,
you're renting a room,
Renting by room.
and everyone's usually got a shared bathroom
Well-
thing and all that. And
isn't
Imagine a
that-
big house with a
I
lot of
think we're
rooms in it, and
doing
you got a
that
bathroom
right
on
now,
that floor.
they rent a room in a house.
Right.
They, you know, like downstairs and
Yeah.
we,
In college.
that's already part of
Right.
our ordinance.
But rooming houses may have several, not just one or two rooms they're renting out, but they may have
We allow
several.
how many?
We allow up to 5 unrelated people
Yeah.
in our single
Yeah,
family
we already,
district.
We
it's
already kinda
already
do it.
there.
That's,
Yeah.
And
And then
and
each
if we're
person
gonna
can
do
have,
more than
you know,
that,
if they
I
have
would
kids,
like
they
the
can-
neighborhood,
those
Exactly.
yeah.
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 It doesn't, the uses don't say like a rooming house or anything, but what happens is you can rent in the single family, and then there's a licensing requirement, so it has the effect of doing that without
Yeah.
specifically stating it, because you can always rent.
Yeah, because
house,
we
so.
have that now, and we also have some conflicts with the neighborhood, because if you have, 5 people can rent within one home, and then there's not enough parking spaces for their cars, and there becomes an issue and congestion within the neighborhood, and we hear from people. So we do have the ability to have all of that, but boy, if we're going to look to say that we have a house and a big house and they can rent out several rooms, then we have to really engage the neighborhoods on all of that, because that's going to have parking issues as well.
Well, we didn't actually recommend listing it as a permitted use, because technically it's already available to them.
It is,
So
Or you
rather
can Airbnb,
than
which is kind of the
highlighting
other
it,
yeah,
yeah.
related thing.
yeah. And we allow Airbnb, and we allow renting within a house.
Right.
5
Right.
unrelated people can rent in a house.
Yeah, so you have the short-term rental is
Didn't
regulated
Kenzie do
in
that?
the licensing,
Didn't
and so
Kenzie
it
do
didn't
that
seem
in
to
one of
make
the houses?
sense
Yeah.
He rented a
to
room.
add it.
Yeah.
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 I think it prompts
You got 10 very
more
poor
concerns.
people living in those rooms day to day.
Bedroom house.
So we didn't really move on that, because again,
It
you
already
can get there,
exists.
right, exactly. We had a gentleman who didn't like the standard that the garage cannot exceed the footprint in the living area. He indicated he had wanted to expand his garage, and to do that, he would have had to expand his house, or the living area of his house, which he didn't want to do,
Right.
which is the point
That
of
one
the
person or
regulation.
several people?
It was a gentleman who had commented on the website.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's exactly the intention of the ordinance, is to not have the garage larger
Yeah.
than the living space of the
Yeah.
house.
Although, I mean, you have so many people now that, because you can afford to buy tools. Like, that's something that's been newer and newer and newer. And you can afford to buy really nice tools now. And so you do have more people that have hobbies. And instead of having a craft room, like they want a shop built onto their garage for their hobby or their woodworking or their, whatever. They're not looking at it for a business, but, it's almost like having a home office, but it's in your garage. So I do see why someone would be unhappy with that. If you have a more modest home, and you do want that kind of room, you're not gonna put it in your house, but you do want that in your garage. So I can definitely see why someone would want a larger garage, and perhaps it would exceed
Yeah.
the footprint of their living area.
I don't know the circumstances of this
Yeah.
request. He didn't explain it. I think people also
Yeah,
like
because-
large garage because they have a lot of items.
Yeah,
They're man caving it, man,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
because I've seen,
Bars, people are doing
TV,
like bars,
bars.
TV. I mean,
That's
they're
the
playing
sports
the
lounge.
Viking game in there. They got multiple couches.
Will not ever go in people's houses anymore. I mean, there's so many people that go
Well,
in their garages.
Sometimes they get
You
kicked out of
don't
their main
want-
house and have to go.
They don't have
somewhere
room in the main house, so the
Yeah,
garage
they
becomes
either
an
don't
accessory
have
building.
room, or perhaps the spouse does not
else. Or
want them
things
in
aren't
the house.
allowed in the primary residence.
Yes. Yes.
Greg's like, yep,
That
living
may or
it,
may not
man.
happen
I've seen
in my
pictures
house.
of Greg's
And caves in
garage.
the garage have
Certain
easier
decor
access to
does not
garbage
go
cans,
in the
car,
house.
other
And
things.
This information was brought to the planning commission, and
Oh,
they,
yeah.
as a recommending body at the time when they reviewed this information, did not suggest making any changes.
Okay,
Sorry, we got distracted there for a minute there.
Yeah,
yeah.
I know, I'm getting excited about, like, and I can't even do it because I live in a townhome.
You can't do it
But,
anyway.
but I'm getting excited. I'm like, you could have so many things in there.
Well, I was gonna save this question for the end, but maybe this is a good time to ask it. When you were talking about additional accessory structures like trampolines not being specifically called out, I'm curious if things like greenhouses need to be included on that list, since those are kind of becoming
Oh,
more
yeah,
prevalent and are technically an accessory structure.
right.
Gardens that become.
Which would make it larger than I
Indoor
think our
greenhouses.
current ordinance allows some of the other buildings in the backyard to be.
You're right, yeah, a greenhouse. I mean, so many people are doing some pretty intensive gardening now.
Botany.
Fortress house.
All right, take a look at that. So again, these were the public website comments. They were okay with the flat roof and the no basement. That, you know, again, they reviewed the red lines, so saw those changes. And then there was quite a few, well, 3 or 4 related to the affordability piece. You know, how to increase affordability. Can we take the existing lot size and split it in half in a certain part of the neighborhood or a certain part of the community so that they could have extra lots to build smaller homes and have more affordability? There was a question about reducing the required house size for affordability, or you know, how, or frankly, just how to do with that, how to get more affordable homes, which I think is something everybody struggles with. And then the parking, the other, that was a bit more policy related, was the parking standards, you know, if they made sense given the interest in promoting mass transit and ride sharing. Is any particular comments on that? And there was also issues about just questioning about the minimum play space per child in daycares. Why the height was removed from the R3B. Who determines visual relief, which is one of the conditions of approval in the multifamily. What was the reference to 10 units changed to 8, and who should the private drive regulations apply to single-family neighborhoods as well? So those were the public comments, and again, after these were all brought to the planning commission, and so the drafts that you have reflect their conversations and what they proposed to address these comments, if anything at all, which they did speak to them, but I think on the whole, there wasn't a lot of movement on the drafts based on these comments. I think, you know, that's something, obviously, if the council's more interested. And then the next page is, Regina had mentioned that you've received a couple requests since the planning commission review. One being to allow the metal fasteners to be exposed on roofs in single-family zoning districts. So right now, for metal roofs, the fasteners cannot be exposed. And then the other one is a request for temporary interim warehousing and distribution within schools or religious institutions. Many times those are in the R1 districts. So those are 2 things that were not specifically spoken to the planning commission.
What does that mean?
Yeah, what does that mean, interim warehouse in a,
So I could help address that.
is that because of Sioux Trail?
Correct, Mayor. We did receive a request from
Yeah.
the school district specifically to use Sioux Trail as a temporary warehouse and distribution for a nonprofit food distribution to serve the community. And at this point, they're asking for it to be a temporary kind of interim solution. Right now, it would not be allowed under our current city code, but we're entertaining the idea to allow it. And since we have received this public comment, we thought it would be a good opportunity as we're making changes to the city code to ask direction from the city council if that's something you would like us to craft some language and incorporate into this ordinance update.
So do we regulate churches and schools or whether they can do food distribution to people that are in need, or?
So the specific use would be
This is in
for.
the neighborhood.
No, well, if you're a church, you're gonna be in a neighborhood because that's the only place you can build a church.
And they're all zoned R1.
Yeah.
The Sioux Trail, it's currently not used as a school, so it would be strictly warehouse and distribution, not on a, it would be like almost like a more permanent location for a multi-year period. So it would function as only warehouse and distribution. So it would function more like an industrial type of function rather than an accessory type use to a school or loading and unloading of like lunchtime services or brain power backpack type services that are really accessory. This would be like full use of that facility as warehouse and distribution, essentially.
Well, the one thing about Sioux Trail is that there's parking spaces if they're going to do distribution, that it have a circulation.
They got plenty of parking.
Yeah.
By distribution, are you meaning like
Food.
a food pantry?
Yeah,
Correct.
Okay.
As like
yeah. So
a,
like
a
right now.
full active use and a primary use of that
Yeah.
building.
That's what you were
Because
filming
right-
the other day, Kara.
Right now,
Yeah,
what
no
we're
kidding.
doing is distributing food out at Diamond Head Mall. And we're using two outlets. One, sometimes we're distributing them on Pleasant, I think it's Pleasant, or else we're using the end of where the seniors enter. And that's very congested because you have the daycare as well. So they're only using the other. So this, I can understand why they're wanting to get a place where they can do that more efficiently and not have so much conflict with little ones.
So we are asking if there's support to make some minor changes to our code to allow it as a temporary type use.
Okay?
I'm gonna pump the brakes a little bit. I don't know that this is something we've seen before or something that we're gonna see repetitively into the future, so I don't know if there's a need to codify this into the R1 ongoing, or just keep it as a temporary application.
So you're saying just an exception for this one particular property?
That's what Regina said, is it's not allowed, so
Yeah.
what would be the process for them to come for us? If it's not allowed, they'd have to go through the full city council variance process
Yeah.
to grant
An
a
IUP.
interim use permit.
So-
I wouldn't want them to have to do that per se. I think staff could handle it.
But then we're just saying we can, and I don't, at its core, I don't have a problem with what's going on, but I don't know if you can just blanket say any R1 building can just become a warehouse
Yeah.
like that, because you're gonna have probably areas where that's not gonna make sense. And
And I agree with that, Vince.
so I would be more comfortable on an interim use permit basis than just saying that's just now allowed moving forward.
So it would be a planning and development with the interim use permit to allow it. That's the route that we would suggest.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah.
I was interpreting this as adding this into our residential zoning code on an
Yeah, that
ongoing
would
basis.
be one option, the proposed option today as a suggestion on if you wanted to incorporate this into the full city code. Or as an individual property, the school district could come and make that request.
And I think a temporary or interim warehouse is something we can do. I remember when KMM wanted to have a temporary use on their property, and we weren't, it was just an interim temporary use. So that's what this is about also. So I agree with you, Vince, that we're just making an exception, but not saying that it's part of the ordinance.
It just makes more sense to me.
I would agree, that's where I just think we have to create a path for them to be able to do it through.
An interim use. An
Yeah, without going
interim,
through-
an interim temporary use.
Yes,
And they would have to go through
Sure.
a typical application process that would go in front of planning
Sure.
commission as a public hearing and then
Yeah.
city council, and it could be for
Everything
a
needs to be-
5-year
yeah.
approval, for example.
It needs to be transparent to the community that we're not making an exception and say, okay, this is because school district. No, we're going to treat it like we treated, the business community as well.
Well, and part of, I'm gonna bounce off of that too, is again, not taking issue with the use, but I look at the food shelf over by my office at the Lutheran Church of Ascension, and the line of cars at that one is almost out to Cliff Road,
Yeah.
because these are becoming so
More and more.
needed.
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
like to give our neighbors in that area the benefit of
Yeah.
a public hearing to ask questions and raise concerns, if address parking and traffic issues too, rather than just
Yeah.
sending it
I
through.
agree, because the thing is, it's a disruption to the neighborhood for something that they've not experienced in the past. So allow them the opportunity to speak.
How,
That's the direction we can,
if you
we
could
can
refresh,
certainly
how
take.
long would that take?
About 60 days at the fastest.
cost.
And the cost is?
$750 for the application, and then we do retain a development escrow of $5,000 to pay for staff time, attorney fees, if needed, with the attorney
It's
fees.
the same process that anybody else
Right.
would have to go through.
Correct.
Okay, the
The council
time
can choose
requirement,
to waive any fees at time of city council.
so we can, okay. Because the time element, okay, I can get past that. The monetary, no. I can't get past that.
We need to pay for staff time and all of the others. It is what this is a function and it is a service. Yeah,
I'm just trying to balance, this is a specific ask by
Yeah.
the school district. We're not, I wouldn't recommend, I think this is to Vince's point, that we just change the R1 to broaden it for everybody,
Right.
but we have to live within the confines, and there's hundreds of carve-outs for all kinds of things within this code, so there's no reason why we can't carve out the school districts to allow this, to isolate to them, not just everybody in an R1 district, because I've read through this a couple times now, and man, there's a carve-out for just about anything and everything that we want. So I don't think it's a problem, but I didn't see it as an R1 broad brush type of change. I saw it as a school district ask, which may be just a 5-year deal. Maybe it becomes a little bit longer than that, because they've got to repurpose a lot of buildings and they have a lot of unutilized assets. And I don't think the city should be stepping in the way or causing them a lot of financial and time to be able to do something with their building that makes sense. I mean, it's a huge building with a lot of
Yeah.
assets
I
inside
don't
that
think
are
we're.
dark.
Yeah, I don't think we have a problem with helping the school district to use an asset that they have, but it is a temporary and interim use, so temporary and interim use. I think we have to follow our process, and there is a cost. Anybody else would have to pay that cost.
And
There is a cost to all of this.
If I may add, I wouldn't say it was this request tonight was not a school district ask. This was a staff item that was brought forward because we received this public comment, and we thought it was timely since we were going to be in front of the council at this work session to ask an item that we may have normally asked at just a general council work session.
So the school district has not asked for this.
They have asked staff, they have not asked to be in front of council
Yeah.
for this specific.
So the
Request
question
tonight.
came from school district, right?
Right.
Of this, is this an option?
You're just trying to give them an answer
A
that
pathway
will
forward.
will be amiable to it or not, is what you're
Right.
doing right now.
I mean, quite frankly, I would lean towards any organization right now asking me to fast track and remove fees for a food pantry. I would lean towards a yes on that. Because I am seeing the present food pantries in our community can't handle the volume, nowhere near. They're lining up hours early. People leave empty-handed, and these are our neighbors. So that's the way I lean on this. So if I were to give a preference, it would be whatever method makes this happen as quickly as possible and with as low a cost as possible. Because while I realize we have staff time, I also realize that every dollar that they're giving us is money that is not going on someone's table for food. So that's my view of this. So I can get past the 60 days. But my preference would be to make it as quick and inexpensive as possible. And that's my view. Other council members might have a different view on this, but this is beyond needed, so.
Well, I can say for me, I got involved years ago with feeding the homeless until we couldn't anymore because of COVID, and they wouldn't let us in. And there are families out there, I agree, that are struggling. Anything we can do to expedite, I know you said 60 days, but we're not required to take 60 days to do anything. We can move things around rather quickly, I would imagine.
That's
We
my
need staff
ballpark
to do all
estimate
of that.
I get,
based
Madam
off
Mayor, I
of.
get that, but I'm just saying, we're talking about a situation of a food pantry where we're feeding our citizens.
That's my
It's
estimate
not,
based
it's
off
not
of.
someone wanting to open a little grocery store over here and they want to store there. I mean, this is actually helping the community. And I'll guarantee you, there are people that live in North River Hills and that probably need that as well, that live right in that neighborhood.
I'll
Vince?
just say again, I don't think anybody at this table has said that this is a bad
That's
idea.
right.
Right.
That's
This
right.
is a wonderful idea. But I think that the neighbors are entitled to at least learn about this and have an opportunity to participate in the process. They just lost a very good school in their neighborhood, and they're probably a little bit jaded by that. And so I just want to make sure that anybody that is curious can come and learn about it and raise any questions that they might have or concerns and follow our process.
Okay. Dan Kay?
Well, we have the ability to waive fees, so
Yeah, exactly.
we'll talk about that when it comes forward.
I'm in favor of what we're doing here because I've been involved with, even during COVID, of helping the school district with food distribution and all of that. So I understand all of that. But the thing is, the school district also got a whole bunch of money from the federal government. We still have to pay for what we need to do and everybody else. So I'm saying we can fast track this if you have the time to get that done. But I agree with Vince that the neighborhood needs the opportunity to have a voice through this whole process. That's why we have all of this, because this is a community, and they have the right to know what's going on and to ask their questions. And so, and I also believe that, like anybody else, the fees for services need to be paid. So nobody is saying no to any of what needs to happen, but yeah, it just needs to be
I
done.
don't think anyone said that the neighborhood shouldn't have a voice in it. We're just saying, if we can move it along quickly, let's move it along quickly.
And we do appreciate that you're giving us your best estimate and not trying to play it. So I thank you for that.
We just have to keep in mind, public hearing timeframes and holiday
Absolutely. We get
that.
schedules,
We get
December,
all that.
January.
Yes.
Yeah.
Meetings get limited.
I know. And I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Kick it to the all-day work session.
Hey, we're kind of light. We could add that.
We'll have to change venues maybe.
And the thing is,
We've got direction, engagement's important, we wanna try to find a pathway forward.
Yeah.
Let staff figure out the details.
yeah,
Yeah.
As far as a quick question about the exposed fasteners on roofs, I know it will be on a later slide, but since we have this slide up, is there a consensus that you're okay with metal fasteners?
yeah,
Don't
yeah.
care.
Majority of the cities don't even, market cities don't address
Yeah.
it.
Right.
Yeah,
And I noticed in here, we
the
have
background.
Lovely.
the raised seam.
to see what
We
they
allow
look like.
we are allowing.
We already
the
allow
raised
metal
seam. We
roofs,
already-
correct.
yeah. There was a time where we said poo-poo to that, and then we came back and fixed it.
Thank you.
Okay,
These things are rust.
Okay, so, just wanna kind of, we've mentioned these, but I guess I'm looking for head nodding kinds of things, or maybe more, don't do that kind of response. So, everybody comfortable with the roof pitch, allowing flat roofs?
Sure.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
no, not requiring basements?
yes,
Correct.
Okay.
What? No.
We'll be dealing with that next week again.
So I,
I lived in
again, I've
California.
mentioned a
There
couple
isn't any.
times the flexibility in the exception piece for the setbacks in the R1. People pretty comfortable about that. I think the planning commission was, it allowed side yard, rear yard, and some front yard. So I think, it was primarily for building additions, living space, not additional garage, except in the side yard, issue. Again, just because that was the idea about renovating and committing to the community. So unless otherwise, I think we'll stick with that unless people feel like,
Yep.
give them more.
I don't mean to drag this on, but I do have a question about building height limit and at least R1 and R1A at 30 feet. I know our building stock isn't the same, but I'm looking at cities like St. Louis Park and Edina building houses on top of houses.
yeah.
I don't think that's gonna happen in Burnsville, but are we kind of preventing that by putting a 30-foot height limit on those homes? I suppose we are, but is that a major concern right now?
So you want to take the height limit off?
No, I'm just kind of throwing out something that I've seen happening.
You mean the mega mansions?
Well, and they're not even mega mansions, they're just like post-World War
Well,
II
yeah.
homes where they're putting additional floors, and Greg
Yeah.
probably knows from.
Yeah, yeah,
But I don't think we don't have that kind of building stock in Burnsville really, so I don't know.
Split levels, I'm not sure how you do
Yeah.
that.
So I'm just thinking out loud when I saw the height restriction, I
This is, you want to increase to 40, you're saying there, right?
just
Well,
get rid of it.
that's duplexes, and he's talking single
Oh,
family.
just single family, I'm sorry.
yeah, this is single family.
Since I've been
R1.
here in the last 6 years now, I have not received, our department hasn't received any requests for height variances or deviations
not
for
many places to build houses
single-family
anymore.
homes.
Yeah, and what we've seen is
What about a
2
remodel?
stories,
Right.
but higher ceilings.
True, yeah. People are
That's
liking higher
Higher
ceilings.
ceilings, but not necessarily
windows, though.
3-story homes.
Floor, right.
It's mostly 2 stories, but much higher ceilings.
Yeah.
Just thinking out loud, I didn't mean to sidetrack the conversation.
Okay.
No, you're not,
question,
you're
though.
not
No.
sidetracking.
No?
I'm
I live in a
sorry.
very narrow Stairmaster home with 36 steps
Don't you
from the
have to yell at
basement to
me.
the top. And on crutches, it's really tight.
Okay, so let's stay focused. What's the
Okay.
next one here?
All right,
Kim.
so how, are people comfortable about combining the R2 and the R3A? So basically doing that
Yes.
R1, R2, R3, R4?
Yeah,
Yeah.
makes more sense.
Okay. Any concern, if we need to increase the duplex or townhomes to 40 feet?
No. I have no problem with that, I mean.
No, why,
Relevant.
why would we?
Because, and those are built to be smaller and higher. That's
Yeah.
the purpose.
Okay,
Yeah, okay. We don't have a height on the, multiple family residential, which will now be the R3, and that's primarily because there's other, criteria in the ordinance that kind of either limit it, as well as the idea that, at least now, construction is such that, I talked to Eric at work because he knows more about construction than me. Generally, people are doing stick buildings for multifamily. They only go 5 stories. After that, you have to go
Yeah.
steel. It's
Well,
too
well,
expensive.
yeah, the price
Unless
also
you're really
goes up
going
after.
for,
Gotta go
you
way
know,
up to
Yeah.
make it worth your
downtown.
while.
Yeah, the
So,
price for
yeah.
developers go up because when they get out of wood structure,
Yeah.
after three,
Then they have to go
4
way
stories,
up
after,
to make
now they're going to have to, the cost of materials, and now they're gonna have to have, steel rather than wood.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's fine to eliminate that because, I mean, there's a price elimination.
Right, right.
To the
I think so.
developer.
Exactly, so,
Yeah, I think you'll have a one-off if it happens.
Yeah.
It's not the norm.
no.
Okay. And then the appropriateness for consistent setback for multifamily residential, which is where it is. So, we're getting to the end here. So are people generally comfortable about the overall changes to the single-family and multifamily zoning districts? We've got a couple things here. I've written greenhouses, the metal fastener, and however it gets resolved on the interim temporary warehousing use. Otherwise, those are the only comments.
So
Okay.
I have a
Kara?
couple questions
Oh,
on
okay.
some of the red lines, if that's okay.
Yep.
Let's see. Under the 1015, where it goes into, we have crossed out major and went to over 80% of the front facade and over 50% of the remaining side and rear exterior surfaces on all walls need to be brick, finished textured stucco, exterior finished wood siding, exterior finished metal siding, exterior finished vinyl or fiber cement. What else would it be?
It's gonna be just an ongoing.
Which section are you, Kara?
It's,
Chapter 15.
I'm on-
section G1.
Yeah. Yeah, mine is,
Facebook.
yeah, there we go, G1, yep.
And I remember, I think, edited this in the last 10 or 13, well, since I've been on council, because this came up with a couple of projects, and I think we ended up changing the language to say major, where we may have specified it before, and it seems like we're going back to specifying again. And I think the reason we went with the major was the circumstances of a building front and maybe a side, the visibility sightlines from a side road.
Yeah.
We got into a debate
Yeah,
with
there
the
was
developer.
stuff where
and-
nobody was ever gonna see that part of the
Exactly,
building.
we were forcing them
requiring-
to
Yeah.
put so much
And
on a
what
wall
else?
that
It
was
was out on 42
completely
in that
underground.
apartment
I think
building
it's
out
the
there.
the giant 8-story project
It was-
off of Grand. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that was.
No, that's the
Yeah.
one, it's the one, it's the other one
Or
on
the one next to
42.
it, yeah, it just, so,
The
it
back was
seems
gonna
like
go into a
we're,
hill, basically.
this language is taking us backwards to where we used to be.
Yeah.
And Eric
Sure.
As a
Weber
person who
presented
doesn't
that.
have that background, I can tell you saying major
That was a plan.
exterior surfaces is incredibly confusing and not very
Oh,
descriptive.
and I get that, and
Yeah.
I get why you went to that, but
You're
my
asking
question is, like,
what
what
materials
else would that
left?
be? Like, what would another exterior surface be that is not one of those listed?
Texture stucco.
I don't know, and there could be new materials that come out, in the next.
yet.
Yeah, exactly, that we haven't addressed. I mean, certainly, there could be a catch-all type of statement for that other type of material that hasn't been
You
invented.
know what would be nice?
Because, I mean, if we're saying you have to have it be 80%, but there's nothing else that 20% could be? I mean, like, are we talking mud? I mean,
Yeah.
It could be other, as long as it meets the building code. So technically, yes, it
Let's
could be
see,
mud.
Jenny,
if
Jenny,
they
Why don't we
wait a
just
minute,
say
wait a
that
minute,
to
I'm
meet
going
the
to go to
building code.
Jenny. Jenny, you have a comment to make.
oh, there we go.
Hi, Jenny.
You belong here.
She's been watching. us
Hi,
this whole
everyone.
time.
Hi.
I would just add other materials that it could be, would be like mason
That's
block
right.
walls.
And that's what we said.
Something
with the-
like that,
Yeah.
would be basically unfinished material.
Yeah, and that's what we
Okay.
did with the building on Grand, was the block that was coming up, and it was going up against, a brick wall.
I've
Yeah.
also seen, like you were saying, where it was like below grade.
Subgrade,
almost,
Yes,
where,
sub-
like by the
yeah.
garages where they have kind of just like
Yeah.
a patterned cement.
Yeah, as long as
you
it's
know,
not
so it's just
visible
an
by the general
unfinished
public.
Spacing.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
think maybe that's the qualifier from my perspective in this, and I get Councilmember Schultz
Yeah.
listing all these materials, like,
There's
why
a
are we
lot
trying
there.
to list everything?
Yeah.
Leave it
Why
open,
not just say what you can't do?
right?
Well, this is 80% of that, 80% of the front and 50% of the sides has to be one of those materials.
Right.
So that means the other 20% and the other 50% can be those materials or anything else that isn't listed. So it's giving them more flexibility than listing them all.
Yeah.
Because basically what you usually do here is the ones you list are the higher quality ones that you're accepting. And so we're saying 80% on the front, 50% on the side and rear.
Yeah.
And so then you can use any of those for the remainder, or
Or
a few
whatever
of
else
these
is
other
available,
things
'cause
that
we don't really
Jenny
care, right?
mentioned, the
That's-
unadorned cement block.
Yeah.
You can use that on 50% apparently on the side or rear.
Well, how do we govern that with our example where when we say 50%, in the case of the building that we dealt with, we had to grant them the ability to not put all these more expensive, nice treatments because they were all below grade, basically.
And right
How
up
do you deal
against
with the
a
sight line? In other words, what's, the surface area that's visible above grade, put it that way. Maybe that's something that can be incorporated. So if we have that situation again where they've got to dig into a hillside and they've got rock walls, but from virtually every angle, half the building is below grade, right? Below site grade, unless you're actually walking on it, right? That we're not saying you have to have really high-quality, expensive materials that are all only visible to the people who live there, who are walking around into that below-grade area.
I'm not 100%, but I think we did make modifications after that Havenwood project
Yeah.
came in.
Yeah, we did.
To amend our code to be more flexible on the side and the rear.
We
to
did
reduce
make
that
that.
number.
We did make that.
Why
that was a
not
trigger.
just say that exterior surfaces need to conform to Minnesota building code?
That's not gonna get you the high-quality materials.
That's right.
On the front. That means you could have a concrete block building.
Okay.
You want a unadorned gray concrete block building
No,
on your multifamily housing?
no.
If they think that's what will attract really good renters, I think that would be maybe not the thing to do. But, like, my concern is that buildings are safe. That's what I'm looking for, is that they're really safe. I'm not as interested in, do I personally think they're pretty?
This is clearly an aesthetic condition,
It is.
and it's a policy decision, but I would say almost every community in the metro has something like this, because people developers build things, and if there's a high demand for apartments, they don't have to make them look as nice because they know they can still rent them. Or they can sell a house that isn't as nice and then they leave. So
right.
I don't think
But
that
you're-
developers always build to the self-interest of that they do the highest quality materials because they need to sell it or rent it. I know that's true because I've worked with plenty of developers, so.
And just as a domino effect, if you do have just a block wall apartment building, that's not gonna have as high value as something that does have this higher quality material breakdown, which means less property taxes for the city to spend on.
No, I
necessary
get that,
things,
but
yeah.
like I'm also looking at this from the view of, although we are having some apartment buildings built in Burnsville, for the most part, we're built out. It's not like we have a lot of green fields that we have to worry about really managing a lot of new buildings coming in. I mean, I guess I'm looking at this to be as clear and easy as possible. And, whether we do major, which you're correct, saying major, that's squishy language and is confusing. Putting the 80% on the front and the 50%, or whatever percentage we put, gets us back to the same problem we had before, which is why we then changed it to something confusing. So, I don't know.
Yeah, Melanie.
Just in the interest of time, is the council interested in us having us take a stab at adjusting this language to something less, or are you comfortable with it being presented as is? Any sort of feedback that we can take back will be helpful.
I'm gonna go around here. I mean, this is a product that's going to be part of our community. So, the language that we have and the adjustments that we made with regard to the property on Grand. We've heard from Kara. Dan Kay?
Well, I think we have to have a component in there of what is 80% that's above visual grade, not site grade. So and because I don't want to have the same problem we had the last time. And so if we're going to go back to these percentages, then we've got to allow for, but we're a very hilly community, so there's a lot of these circumstances that can pop up. And maybe in the future, it's more remodels or somebody, buying a couple homes and putting up
Some redevelopment,
a new
right, yeah.
redevelopment type of thing.
Okay. Okay.
And as far as trying to list every material, there's a lot of stuff in there, but there's not everything in there. As Jenny pointed out, there's one that's missing that's actually probably pretty desirable.
Okay.
Maybe have
Is
staff.
that understood? I'm going to go over to Vince.
Gonna kind of echo what Dan said. I don't want to be in a position where we were with the other one, where we've got a side of a building facing a hill and they're having to put I think we beat that to death, and that's understood. But we are gonna hopefully have some redevelopment on 42 where there's gonna be 3, potentially 4 sides of a building visible from high trafficked areas. So I'm just kind of throwing that out there as something to consider. I'm generally okay with what I see here. If I didn't just knock my contact into the corner of my eye, I could see it better. Is it too vague for a developer, or is it too vague for us? I think it's better than what we had before.
I think you have the language from the last time, and I don't know why it's not in it.
And I think our staff knows, based on that other project, that if somebody's coming into a hillside, and, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about right now the new building going up on 11 and 35E. Is that building gonna be held to the facade requirements facing 3 sides that are gonna be visible from 11 and then 35?
Good question.
Yeah, okay.
So it's just, it's so circumstantial to every project. So I'm sorry that didn't help, but
No, but I think staff understands, because I'm going in the same direction with regard to where you're, because we're in redevelopment, and a lot of the redevelopment is going to be on 42 that we're looking at right now. Danji,
We're not done in the heart of the city either with
No.
redevelopment. Most of those
No.
buildings are actually for sale over there right
Yeah.
now. And I don't want to have a cinder block buildings being put up all over town because it's not going to look good. I live next to a whole development of cinder block in my neighborhood, and they don't look good. But I don't want our developers to have to put the brick and stone in an area where nobody's going to see it. But they've got to have some sort of covering on it other than just a cinder block back there. I mean, that doesn't make sense either. But they can do some sort of cheaper material, I'm sure. As we go through the redevelopment of the city, we'd have to ensure that it's going to look nice as we're redeveloping the city. I mean, the developers will come in for a while, but if they start seeing a bunch of cheap buildings going up, they'll quit coming in and they'll move on to some other place where it's a little richer for them. Because they do want to attract the rents. And I'd like to think that all developers will do the right thing, but I don't think all developers will do the right thing. And we've seen it in the past, and it's,
Yep.
so we do have to have some standards in our city. I don't think we have to be crazy about our standards, but I thought what we came up with out on 42 a few years ago with that apartment building worked out fine. It helped the developer get their job done, and the parts that people can see look great when you drive by it. The other part, not so much. But I don't want to just see cinder block either, because that makes no sense.
Well, can we have staff take another stab at this? Because I'm listening to everyone else, and I don't think it's clear, like the language that we're asking for. So maybe if staff could try to interpret what
I
we're
think
saying
well,
and
what-
give
what
another
you-
go
What
at
I'm
it.
hearing is that everybody wants to have a high standard. So if it's 80%, but we all understand that we don't want to require them, if it's going to be against a wall, a brick, I think it was then, they can, and we did go through that process, use that standard, but on 42, we're in redevelopment. I want this city and the product in this city to look attractive, where people, and we do know, developers come in, they put up something, they sell it, they move on. We live with what happens here. And we also know that developers put up buildings and they say it's really great, and we've experienced that they're falling apart, some of those buildings.
But thank God they got
Yeah.
brick on front.
But,
I think we understand. It's a visibility, no visibility.
Yeah.
We can come up with
but
something.
you want good-looking product in the city.
Well, I think it's important for our residents and our businesses in this city. We want to attract good businesses. The city better look pretty good when they get here, because
Okay.
there are other shiny, bright objects all around us right now.
Especially
So
if
why
you're
don't
gonna
you take a
redevelop.
stab and bring back something, and take a look at what we did change things to back then, and then put that in. So Melanie, is there anything else?
I didn't know if Councilmember Schultz had a couple other questions. She
Okay.
said she had a couple comments on red lines.
do.
I just want to make sure we didn't miss that.
So then on number 4, no wall or facade shall exceed 200 feet in length without visual relief. Visual relief is defined as varying the design of the building by incorporating design features such as window horizontal or vertical patterns, contrasting materials, colors, or varying wall depths. And that is something that is being proposed to be added, that has not been in there previous. And I don't particularly see why we would need to add it. We haven't had it.
Yeah, I'm curious, where'd that come from?
I would say, well,
That the planning
it's
commission?
just, it's a way to break up, a long facade.
Right.
So, rather than just having a blank wall, you have some kind of definition in it. It could be anything as simple as you just change, the color. Often residential have a darker base on the bottom and a lighter base on the top. That would work. It's something so that you just don't have an unadorned flat wall.
Oh, no, I get
Yeah,
that,
where'd
like,
it- where'd it come
get
from?
that, but we haven't had it before, so I don't see why we would.
Okay,
So
Regina?
I can help answer that. So under G.
Jenny's ready to hop in
Oh.
too, I can see her. Look at her, she's excited, man.
So under G, building design and materials on the previous page, there's a paragraph that's pretty vague that talks about must be attractive in appearance. All buildings should be of good aesthetic architectural quality as demonstrated by inclusion of elements such as accent materials, entrance, window treatments,
Right.
contrasting colors. So to give, since it's such vague language, what does attractive mean? So we
Right.
tried to put a number to a way that a developer could say, okay, it doesn't, like, what does attractive mean? I don't
Got it.
need to define that, but I can show it. I can show that I'm hitting these differences in materials by including these elements and do it every 200 feet to help break up that building wall. So it was a way to kind of take that language and make it not so fluffy and putting some structure to it.
Got it. Okay, so and I did see the cross out on the one before, so what you're doing is you're crossing out that language, but pulling the intent of that out, and then defining it into like more objective terms.
So it's a matter of just different colored brick?
Yeah, yeah,
Just a-
Could be color,
Yeah.
could
Probably
be
could do a
window.
bump out of the wall, like
Yeah.
fire, those types of long walls generally get the fireplaces or the chimneys, and so there's a bump out in
Yeah.
the wall to get it, so it's not one flat. Anyway, I haven't really seen,
We're seeing that in
Evidence
all of our
of-
buildings right now.
yeah, I haven't seen any evidence where
Yeah.
there's a 200-foot wall that's just nothing but vinyl siding and
No.
nothing else. No
You'll see it a
windows,
lot
nothing.
more in business industrial.
Yeah.
Industrial, you'll see
Yeah,
it all along the
exactly.
way.
Yeah,
But,
I mean, and
it's
that's
the
where I
same
would
kind of
expect.
idea.
Expect that. But on that one, so on the incorporating design features such as windows, comma, horizontal or vertical patterns, comma, contrasting material colors or varying wall depths, do you mean that, but is it supposed to be contrasting materials, comma, colors, or? Because otherwise, contrasting materials, colors is the materials and colors are the same thing, but it could just be a color. Is that correct, or am I reading that incorrect?
She said it
Yeah.
was color.
yeah.
So
Well, yeah, okay, so
Yeah.
that's why I'm checking. I live with an attorney, man, so I'm asking about the comma there, so it could just be a color.
Right, could be
Yeah.
contrasting
Okay.
materials or contrasting colors.
Contrasting materials,
Comma,
colors,
colors, or
or
wall depth.
varying wall depths,
Yeah.
okay.
Got it, thank you. Okay, that I appreciate,
Those townhomes over the fire.
I know.
It's all lined up, but they're different colors.
Everything could be built with the contrast.
Okay, in the 10-12-3 permitted accessory uses,
I'm sorry, which chapter?
it is. Says 10-2-2 permitted uses within an R1
Oh,
family use district. Oh, wait, actually, go one down, so it's the little thing, the 10-12-3 permitted accessory uses, so right below that. Sorry about that. And then with any R1 family use district, the following uses shall be permitted accessory uses. When you're talking about the antennas, one thing to call out, so we're looking at, you can do one satellite earth station antenna, which I'm gonna ask you,
Is that a science fiction thing?
what is that? Because I'm just making sure I understand what the heck that is.
Gate ramp.
Dish.
Well, I mean, no, they're talking about like the dish for your satellite, for broadcast satellite, but this is something,
I don't have the definitions up to see if we have a definition or definition section of our city code. I don't have an answer for that.
Melanie might have an answer.
Well,
Okay.
be
Sorry.
careful about that, but I'll give it a try. A little bit later in that page, similar to the previous discussion, it appears as if there's stricken language that is essentially the same.
right,
And so there's no change, you're just looking for the definition.
right, because one thing I'm checking on this is we're looking at more satellite internet, which is not cable and is not broadcast TV. So that doesn't sound like it's that either. And then you have, so if a person has satellite internet, then they can't have satellite TV.
I think these are like
Correct?
those big,
The
these
big
are those
dishes.
big dishes that like
Yeah.
sit on the ground, not
Yeah.
like a
Right.
direct TV.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's 1 meter. This is like 3 feet.
Yeah, it's
like
the
a
size of
couple-
So I'm
this,
just,
yeah,
but
dish network.
just
or
check
whatever.
it, right, because those are like, and they're getting smaller and smaller.
You don't
Like,
really see those
people aren't really
anymore.
doing those
You
huge,
very seldom ever see those.
Well, maybe out in rural areas, but
right.
Southwest.
But but if I could find out, and it doesn't have to be now, just what the heck does that mean? Earth station and antenna. God, I hope.
Yeah.
But
some-
I'm feeling better that no one else knows the definition of this word.
Earth
So
station
so
antenna.
I feel better about asking for that. Again, you don't have to answer that now. You can just, if I get the definition later, I'm a happy camper.
To tag on to what Councilmember Schultz has brought up, you are introducing language with a 1 meter limitation, and I think it might have been in there. Has that been in there for quite a while in our code where?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because when you go down
Yeah.
this,
The
in the
10-foot dish days are
stricken,
done
in the
in
stricken
Burnsville.
language,
Yeah.
Unless you're grandfathered non-conforming. You might
Right.
have one out in southwest Burnsville, because you're pulling in
That's
free.
probably where you'll
packet
find
games.
it.
yeah.
Right, so
Yeah.
maybe that, I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't know.
because R has all that stricken language. And so up top is where you're,
I think just with
Which is weird, because it says signs are regulated under chapter 30 of this title, and then under that, it's just out of the blue, satellite. earth
right,
stations.
I know,
It's
it's
like
like-
it's in the wrong place. I don't
It's
know
kind
what
of a
that is.
weird,
We're gonna put it in the right place.
yeah, because it's, you're striking it under R, and then it's redefined, but not really defined. You will have a glossary on all these words, like you do in other things.
So we do have a
Yeah.
right now we have a definitions chapter of the
Yeah.
city code.
Okay,
And we are
got it.
adding to that,
Yeah.
additional definitions.
Okay, Melanie?
Well, and just from an organizational perspective, and I appreciate this, it's alphabetical. So antenna got moved up in the
Right.
order because,
starts with an A.
Yeah,
you got it. That makes
yeah,
sense.
because under R, it's you striked out.
Yeah, so
And
it's
then it,
clear,
yeah,
clear.
it's just
And
organizing it in a way.
And I think I know the answer to this one, but under 1013-4A interim uses, within any R1A, one family, rural residential district, and it's talking about permitted uses. So just so that I know, since it allows interim uses, people can still do their flooded ice rinks, right? That's still cool. Yes?
Yes.
All right, because I knew I was gonna get questions on that one, so, because people have been really enjoying their flooded ice rinks, so, thank you.
We gotta have some fun in winter.
In R1A.
Yeah, exactly,
Specifically,
right, and
I would consider it an accessory use.
Is this new language? Oh, I
yeah,
see.
it is, so that, like,
Yeah.
all that's red line, because it's really spelling things out, you know, like, right, you can't do archery, you can't do trap and skeet shooting.
Good idea.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying, right? You know,
Common sense.
yeah,
So it was allowed by reference before in the R1A. We reference interim uses permitted in the R1 district. So we're striking it from the R1 district. We're saying that's no longer an interim use in the R1 just because it's not something that you would typically see in an R1. But we're saying all of these are allowed as an interim use in R1A and listing it out now only in R1A. So we're completely striking it from R1 is the proposal. And shifting it to
Oh,
R1A.
wait, so you're saying our residents, like, in town, not in the rural areas, but in town, now they would not be able to have their little backyard?
Archery range.
No, the
of
red
10
ones,
It's on the bottom of page 33.
Yeah.
yeah.
Skeet shooting.
The athletic field, boat launch,
But it's
fishing
not
and
calling
hunting.
out ice rink.
See, my page numbers
Might
don't
be
match your
considered an
page numbers,
athletic
so.
Field.
Well, if I can, when I read it, it appears as if the intent is to define 5 different kinds of private and public outdoor sports and recreational uses.
Yeah.
Yes.
And absent those being listed, is it assumed, is the intent that it would be allowed? Regina, is that how one would read it?
If it's not listed in our code, it's generally prohibited if it doesn't fall under one of the categories.
Geez.
Oh,
So then I would be curious about boat launch ramps without knowing much about boat launch ramps, but is that gonna impact our residents on the lake?
Those would be allowed through the DNR and not through like a city permit, for example.
I guess we need to talk to staff about the ice rink.
Yeah.
I have a different opinion, sorry. As, if it was just, a flooded rink and there
Yeah.
isn't any
And we
structure or
do
anything,
have people
I
just
wouldn't
right
consider
off of
that
11 who do
an
have that,
accessory
and I know.
use.
Yeah, they put up
There's
lights.
signs out right now
Yeah.
with companies putting in rinks for people.
Exactly, yeah.
So,
I don't consider that a structure necessarily.
That's
Well,
what
yeah,
I-
and that's my question
It's a
is,
lawn ornament.
It's, yeah, it's no different than playing football in your yard in the summertime,
well, yeah, well,
or any
Putting up
game.
some goals and
yeah.
cones and.
How
We
about a skateboard
we
park
probably
in
need
your
to
backyard?
clarify the ice rink.
And we have sport courts.
that's, you are correct. We
Yeah.
actually do have a couple skate
Skateboard parks and some
skate
people.
park in people's backyards.
Well, there's sport courts in people's backyards also.
So I guess I'm just making sure those are, like, we're not inadvertently
Yep.
Wait till we get to the chickens.
eliminating those.
And the ducks.
Oh, we got it listed.
Yeah, and ducks.
By the way, everyone, this is kind of a preview of our next couple of years here at this meeting.
I feel like I'm on planning
We're going
commission
through
again.
all of our ordinance and the citizens ones starting to start
So-
coming at us next month.
That's all the things I have marked on.
Okay.
I love
Wait, see,
those
thank you.
charts in the back.
Well, and that would be one of the questions I have
Love
for
those.
you all while we're talking charts. So the uses, we can just have the charts, or we can have the charts and have the uses still listed. And then you just have to remember to change them everywhere.
Yeah.
And the ordinance just is longer. For the dimensional piece, we were thinking it might be nice to have as a handout, but still have it in the ordinance. Because there's all those exceptions that are very hard to fit in little boxes. So you have it as kind of a quick reference, but the real regulations sit in the ordinance. But the uses, the question is, do you want them doubled up?
We want it as easy to read as possible.
Yes, you do.
Okay, Melanie?
Well, if I may, yeah, I would agree with Councilmember Workman. Maybe want it in one location, but from a practical standpoint, we can work on materials that we would communicate to the public in as plain English and as easy as possible. Is that an option, Kim? Or is that not answering your
Well, we're gonna have it in
question?
a table.
Yeah.
The question is, do you just also, like, if you go to R1, you can either find it in the table, or it has the permitted and the conditional and the interim uses also listed in the R1. So
And
it's redundant to the table, the table's the quick access, but you also, somebody might say, I'm an R1 and just go to the R1 and not go to the table.
And it can be very interactive, just like what they,
You just have to always remember that you've got
You're
these things
updating
in
two
two
places.
spots.
And it's all hyperlinked anyways, right? So
Yeah.
if you're not sure about something, it should, in theory, bring you to what the definition of a ground-mounted satellite dish is.
Okay. Michelle?
Less than 1 meter.
Less than one meter.
The only point I can make here is as a person that assists with the codification of the city code, that redundancy can be kind of cumbersome at times.
Right.
And I think that in the effort to be more
Clear.
user-friendly, having it double noted in the city code itself is maybe not the best way to achieve that. And still having those community engagement type handouts with the tables and the information there is something that we can do, but there's no requirement, or I don't see a real necessity for it to be in the code where we could just, like you said, have a place where here's all this very visible information that's more digestible and easier to understand in these tables, but not necessarily codified as part of the code. Because, like you said, most people don't go looking through Title 10. Is this me? I'm not even sure if this is me, because it's so confusing for the average person who's not well-versed in what's an R1 district, what's an R2 district, right?
Yeah.
So to make it easier, what I would think on a staff perspective is have that information available for the public, but not necessarily as part of the code, because you're really doubling that information up in your code, and you're risking the part of somehow not having it accurate in there because you miss a spot or a comma or
Well,
something.
we were actually recommending to not have the permitted conditional and interim uses listed in each of the districts and actually use the table. And the reason is because it just gets voluminous, and often what happens is you do the R1 and then the R1A says everything in the R1 plus these, you know, and you're stacking, and so then people are flipping back and forth, and so that's why we were like, well, the table, you look and see everything in one spot,
We're in
but
layman's
not in the
terms.
dimensional piece.
So are you thinking you have the table, and if people want to look deeper, they can click on that square, and it then
Opens it up.
opens it up and lifts it out, or are you not thinking that?
I'm looking at Michelle just because I'm not sure what the codifier's capabilities are, and if it's something that can integrate those links to kind of bounce back and forth. I'm
We
not
are
sure if you know.
switching to a self-codification process, so.
As if you look at,
Use GIS to codify.
Because we had a presentation on that
Does
night,
everything
so
else.
we're kind of excited.
really like
Last
it.
presentation we do on that.
because basically,
I do
if,
think that it's possible to use GIS
Yeah.
links
To-
to enhance the experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To bolster it, right?
And I think that would be, that's been the direction of the council, right? Plain language, make it easy, make it user-friendly.
Yeah.
So if that's still the direction.
That is the
give staff
direction.
the freedom to kind of,
No, complicated.
okay.
Yeah,
That's
no,
the-
make it very complicated.
Yeah,
We like
no.
We don't wanna go
Byzantine.
easy.
Only
Understandable.
we can understand.
so if that's
we keep
still
the
the
jobs.
council's direction, we can
Yeah.
run with that and make
Yeah,
some
that is the
recommendations.
dir- that is the direction.
Citizens group's working right now.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay.
Okay,
Anything else?
Is that clear?
are we done with all our
Talking about
questions?
the code review task force.
I have a couple areas.
I thought
that I
you
have
had like a
questions
group of angry
Okay,
citizens.
Dan
that
Kay
you-
has
I'm
questions.
trying, there's some angry people on that task force.
on. Go back to the beginning.
Dan Kay?
I'm finding this is a very long document, and I only have 12.9 inches of screen to look at. As if that's small. Section 10.12.1, letter E. Maximum grade driveway is 15% to be reviewed by city engineer to ensure there is an acceptable parking pad for 2 cars on the site. That's a holistic add-in. Apparently, we didn't have anything like that, maybe, or is it moved from some other spot? But I'm curious why, in a hilly city like us with grades far greater than 15% on a lot of driveways, especially in hilly areas, why do we have this 15% trigger that the engineer of the city has to get involved to make sure that two cars can park on it. That's the way I interpret it, but you could clarify.
15% is really, really steep for a
Yeah.
driveway.
Well,
And
we got a
so,
lot of those.
I think the point is that you really try hard not to have that happen, and if it's something that much, then the city engineer needs to make sure that there's two acceptable parking pads on the site, which may not actually be on the driveway. They might actually be, I mean, I know of houses where they have, the pads kind of right up there,
Yeah.
right by the road where it's
Yep.
flatter. And so it's just as somebody needs to maintain that they're meeting the criteria of having the two cars on site.
I guess my question is rooted in, why are we adding something like that if we never had it before? Why is it necessary that we put that in? I'm looking at it through the lens of, why are we adding more reasons for staff to have to get involved in something? If this has never existed as a problem in the city, then why are we adding it in? And where did it come from? Who's suggesting this?
My recollection is that came out of conversations with the staff to make sure that that people were actually having parking on site that was workable, rather than saying, I've got it, but
Cars
they
on
don't
the
have it, and then they're parking on the street.
I don't see the need. I would kill that personally. I don't know that that's, at least it doesn't pass muster for me to justify why we have to add another step in, and why an engineer has to get involved in a driveway. We're a pretty old built-out city, and we've never had that I'm aware of, and I've walked and driven around the city a lot, and I see a lot of very steep driveways, far more than 15% grade. There's some really scary driveways. I can't imagine how they get down when there's a little bit of an icy situation out, but to me, that's just an unnecessary additional thing.
Okay,
Is there an
Melanie?
issue?
At the risk of speaking for our city engineer, Jen Dennis-Root, maybe we just send this back
Yeah.
to get some engineering
some
insight
insight.
on
Yeah.
this language.
Why
and we
they
can-
asked
Yeah,
for
we
it.
can come back to
because
the council.
sometimes it has to do with a safety issue also, and
you
we
got it.
don't understand. So have Jen comment on that. Okay,
1014-1H, just to clarify, that language says no exposed fasteners are permitted. We're gonna change that based on our earlier discussion. Okay. And then 1014-3C, daycare centers as home operated. This is under the two-family, within any two-family accessory use. You'll have to give me some clarification on exactly where that is, because it's a little confusing, but I read this as two-family dwellings. Let's say, I think of a duplex. Duplex typically has a front backyard. It's just two homes that are joined by a common wall. And it says daycare centers as home occupations. However, daycare centers as home occupations with more than 3 kids are not permitted in a multi-unit building. And then what was struck in was, in a building with more than 2 dwelling units is prohibited. So I'm trying to understand, does that mean a person who has a home daycare and lives in a duplex under this new language, that would be prohibited? That's the way I read it, but I'm not sure, and interpreted it, but I'm not sure I'm 100% based on the section we're in. So if you can clarify that, that'd be great.
okay. Probably not tonight if you don't have the answer, but bring it back.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like we've suddenly cut home daycare out of duplexes. And I understand in a multi-unit building, like 3 or more, it becomes maybe a more complicating factor in an apartment complex, but duplex situations, I don't see any reason why we would restrict that. I mean, and it kind of looks like that's the way it was written. It says in a building with more than 2 dwelling, which was that 3+ type of situation. But now we've taken it and simplified it and said, you can't do it in any multi, right? So single-family home only.
I thought that was regulated by the state anyways.
I don't know as far as where they can have them.
Because your
Why don't you get
license
the information and
comes from the
come back
state.
to us
I'd
instead of?
agree with Councilmember Workman that
Yeah.
I have a note that we need to look to see if that's regulated elsewhere
state.
by
So
a higher
just
jurisdiction.
bring back the information rather than trying to guess what it is.
Under 10.14.4, conditional uses, D, a residential program, group home, this is all new language. Group home, so a residential program slash, or parentheses, group home for 7 to 16 persons as identified and licensed by the state of Minnesota Department of Human Services, subject to the following conditions, so conditions of conditions. So this looks as though it's adding some language within our zoning to allow more than the 6, which is governed by, I think, the state,
Yeah.
correct? Yeah. And it's trying to maybe write in some guidelines for if a person wants to go beyond 6, as many as 16. Is that what was the spirit behind this language?
Yeah, again, if you guys don't have the answer, please bring it back.
Are you getting tired, Madam Mayor? I'm sorry, it's
No,
3 hours into this.
I wanna,
You're pushing pretty fast. I'd like to get some answers.
yeah. Jenny?
Yeah, Councilmember Keeley, that is in the statute for group homes, so wherever we allow multifamily
Okay,
uses, we have to allow daycares of 17 to 16 with a conditional use permit.
So that's by statute.
Well, yeah, I'm in this section that is group home. That's what I'm talking about
Yeah.
now.
She said daycare.
You said daycare, so
but, I
it
mean,
threw me
it's-
off.
It's a resident.
Sorry,
it's a-
group home.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so now we're, in a sense, we're just adopting the state's
Yes.
language. Okay,
Yeah.
now it makes sense.
Yes,
It's the same thing as adding the manufactured home parks. That's also required.
yes.
Good, that was my last one. Thank you. See, I was pretty close to the end there.
I don't know how you get 16 people in a duplex, but it
Okay.
kind of regulates itself a little bit.
Anything else?
Yeah, the other one was a daycare. The duplex was a daycare question. This is a group home question.
Yeah.
Different questions.
Medium density.
Yeah, just, you're right. I mean, I don't know how you get that many, but I just didn't want to,
No, I'm not
As people-
chastising you for asking the question. I was,
really? Are you sure? No, I don't want to
Someone walk through
put
the parking lot.
home daycares out of, preclude them from being in business at a duplex.
deal with it yourself.
Any other questions for Kim and Regina?
Nice job.
Yeah.
good job.
Yeah, Kim and Regina, did you get all the information you need?
We did. So our intent was to go back to the planning commission with the proposed ordinance in an adoptable format and then to council. Now, we heard tonight that you may want to see some language reworked. Do you feel comfortable having that language go before planning commission for their review and recommendation and then to council? Or do you want us to check back in with you at a future date with those changes before we send it back to planning commission and then to council?
Well, I think, for me, I can only speak for me, we have these task force and the planning commission for a reason. Let them do their job, and then it'll come to us, and we can do, if we do all the work and then give it to them and say, okay, approve it, that's,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and why even have the task force?
Right, and I'll be there on the 22nd,
Okay,
Yes.
so I can also be there and
I'll watch.
assist,
Yeah.
so.
And if there was any changes that we did propose in ordinance format, you could always pull that off of an agenda to speak to it if you wanted to and send it back that way.
yeah, because you were also saying that what you'll have before them is the definitions also.
Yeah, we'll have the glossary, right?
Not at
Yeah.
this
No,
point.
No.
It'll come
because
at a
that'll
future
be
date.
constantly modified as
Okay.
we go through the entire ordinance. So we don't want to adopt it and then adopt it again, and, because we're going to be
Okay, you say the
fine-tuning
next
that.
chapters to review, that's going to be in 2022, next year.
So we have business and industrial coming next, and then a list of definitions, mixed use, transit-oriented development, parks, commercial recreation,
Yeah.
planning and development signs, and I don't know where the rest of the list went, but additional items, and we'll bring them to you in kind of chunks. Know that business and industrial will probably be a lengthy discussion, I would assume.
Yeah.
So bring snacks.
Bring it back in chunks so that we're not, because it's just voluminous.
Wait till the Citizens Task Force stuff
Yeah.
starts coming, which should be next month.
Chili cook-off that night.
Okay.
We can start feeding
Anything
us.
else? Staff
We're good.
clear? So it'll go to the planning commission, they're gonna do their work, and then it comes back to us. Okay? All right.
And welcome.
Oh,
And keep
Yeah.
speaking up, please.
Heavy lift.
The staff did a great job. It's been a
Yeah.
group effort, really
Yeah.
good.
Thank you, and
We're
thank
just
you,
getting
staff,
started.
for all of the
Thank you.
work. Yeah.
Yeah.
See you again soon.
Okay. We're gonna take a 5-minute break, and then we'll reconvene.
Add anything more to our agenda for a year.
Reconvene, and we are at roundtable. So, fire muster, city contribution, is that, Councilmember Keely? What is this all about?
Let me go to my emails. This is something that Melanie and I talked at the one-on-one, and I asked her to put it on the all-day work session. I want to talk about our current policy for the legacy festivals with regard to what the city provides, and have a discussion on that fixed support number. And never thought about it before until I got more involved in the fire muster, and it's a lot bigger number, obviously, as far as the support number. A lot of public safety and public works there. But many, many years ago, when we talked about that, we came up with that fixed number because it was a deterrent for any one of the legacy festivals to add more days, events, and essentially saying, well, the number will just keep getting bigger and bigger. Back when it was a non-fixed number, then it became a 50%. Actually, I think it was fixed number, then a 50% of that. Now we're back to that fixed number. But what it doesn't account for, if you have a lot of, like the fire muster, if you have a lot of city staff involved, is wage inflation. So when we say, well, 7 years ago we set it at this number, and as the years go by, unless you figure out a way to not use as much city resources, the cost of the labor is going to continually go up every year, and it'll surpass that number. And so the event sponsors or the event organizers then have to fundraise more to cover inflationary costs of labor, because we've said, this is the number and this is all you get, right? So I think I remember back when we had that discussion, either the first or second time, I don't think anybody was thinking, well, what happens with inflation? But it may have come up if those meetings were easily findable and watchable, and we might have said, well, we'll just, every so few years, take it up as a discussion and account for that. The fire muster this year had a second night of fireworks, which I came to the council with, and you graciously supported. What I didn't factor in was the second night of fireworks was going to trigger a whole nother round of fire department folks making sure that it was a safe fireworks, clearing the grounds, doing all that. So I asked BJ to pull a number together to find out what that additional amount was, and it ended up being, I think, 1,748, I think that's it, roughly $1,800. And so had I thought about that, I probably would have asked for fireworks plus whatever city costs would have gone to that. Now, separate from that, the bill from the city actually grew even higher because we had some additional costs. And you can see the history on the spreadsheet. It goes up a little every year. And in some areas, mostly it's PD and FD, public safety. There's parks and some other involvement, and those are much smaller numbers. So I thought it would be a good discussion to have at the all-day work session to talk about our policy and find out if we need to have a discussion about, is it logical to just have this one fixed solid number that doesn't recognize any sort of inflationary costs with city support? Or is there a way to overcome that or support that in another way? So my ask tonight was for the 1,700 and whatever the number is, for the council to help offset what was the actual cost of the additional night of fireworks. And I come with egg on my face because I felt foolish that I didn't think about that when I made the ask. I just asked for the cost of the fireworks show, not the fireworks show costs related to the fire department having to come out there and support that second night. Because that's part of the fireworks, or I'm sorry, the fire muster cost that the city sponsors is one night of fireworks and the fire department's manpower and a lot of volunteers. The MVN is out there doing a big perimeter, the landing zone perimeter. And so it isn't just FD, but obviously we're charged for the FD and the other volunteers we really appreciate. So the ask is for roughly about $1,800 from the city to essentially cover 100% of what that second night of fireworks was. And then we'll have a discussion at the all-day about just the governing policy, and there's a few other aspects of that we can maybe talk about. It's a good item for our all-day work session because we're light on the agenda side of the all-day work session.
I thought you all had enough money in your budget to cover all of your cost. Fire muster, don't you have a?
We had our invoice this year from the city was 4,000 higher than that, which 1,800 of that was the fireworks. The rest is some inflationary costs. And it was, it was over last year and over the year before. It just keeps getting a little bit bigger and bigger and bigger over that number.
Let's separate out that discussion on the policy, but
Yeah.
the 1,800 that you're asking for.
Yes.
I mean, that's an exception.
Mhm.
And
My basis for
you're right,
asking
you
is.
said you have egg on your face. I
Yeah.
mean, you have a budget, and that's something that you would have to have known that you're gonna have to have cover, because this is not the first time that
Admittedly, I didn't think about it.
Huh?
I admit it, I didn't think about it. I didn't think about, oh, wait, we don't just have fireworks costs. We have city staff, fire department costs because of that second show. Never even thought about it. So I'm here with egg on my face saying with this, and the reason I'm asking, it's based on the fact that the city council supported the second fireworks show. I'm asking for the real cost of that fireworks show, which was a couple thousand more than what I thought it would be because I didn't think about the fire department's involvement is required
Let
to
me
put
ask
the
you
show
this,
on.
does your funds not able to fund the 1,800? Don't you have enough money in, I thought that the
We
fire
have
muster has
reserves that
enough.
we can dip into.
Yeah.
I'm making the ask because I asked for X dollars to cover a fireworks show, and I didn't ask for the proper amount. So I'm back asking for the amount that actually I would have asked for in the first place. Had I thought about it, asked BJ, hey, what would be the fire department cost to put on that second show? I would have asked for probably, he probably would have estimated it maybe at 2,000, and my ask would have been 12,000 instead of 10,000.
In
Quite simply.
Dan's defense, he hasn't seen the finances for fire muster to the depth that you've seen up to this point.
Yeah.
That was fairly limited information to a select few people, so I will give you that.
I was I mean, it was my fault. I should have remembered that, wait, fireworks shows require fire department presence. So I'm at the discretion of the council. It's an ask. I thought it was a fair ask because it's my original ask revised to include something I forgot. But it's up to the council to honor it or not, or support it or not. And I don't take anything personal.
Has the policy changed at the fire muster? It used to be when you guys added an event, you talked about it, and then you came back and said, here's how we can fund the event, and then you guys approved the event, and then you did it, whether it was adding cribbage or this and that. You always had to come back with, what was your source of funding to make that happen?
Are you talking about back to the city council?
Yeah, I mean, no, not to me, but
No.
to your board at the fire muster, that was always the policy of the fire muster.
Yeah, we
If you
talked
added-
about it. We wanted to do, for our 40th anniversary, we wanted to
No,
do
I
a
get
second night
that.
of fireworks, and hence I came to the board.
But you didn't come back with the funding, is what I'm saying. You didn't work all that out.
No, Nope.
And I'm sorry about that.
No one, quite frankly, thought about it. We're all just excited
But I
and thrilled that
tell
the
ya,
city supported it. and
If the fire
forgot.
muster has money and they can do it, I mean, you are a private organization and you should probably step up and take care of that. And I'm happy to talk about policy change at the all-day work session. But also, I will tell you, talking about policy change, I don't want to have an open checkbook just because you decide to add 3 more events that the city's going to pick up the
I didn't
tab
say
on
that.
either.
Right, hey, watch, don't start going down that road, Dan. I
No,
never
hold
said
on,
that
hold
one
on.
bit. I
You
said
let me
the-
finish, will you
the-
please?
The back.
Just let me finish, Dan.
You know the back
Let me
discussion on this.
finish.
Okay, so
You're
don't
gonna get
make
an
a
absolute no.
statement
If you're
like
not gonna
that.
let me talk, it's an absolute no, all right? End of the discussion. No,
You're welcome for helping you when you asked.
yeah.
Just don't make a statement like, well, open checkbook. I never said anything about that. I'm talking about, I specifically cited
I'm done talking about it,
inflationary
Dan.
wage costs.
You can talk
That's
for the
it.
next hour on it. I'm done talking about it. You can't have a discussion without attacking me like that? No.
It's because of your inflammatory
Okay,
statements that
right.
you make.
All right, fine.
Okay,
We're done
all
with
right,
the discussion
all
as
right.
far as I'm concerned. No.
Okay,
Good.
so here's where I stand with all of that. You have money in your checkbook that you can cover the cost, the 1,800. Correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
we're
I
going to
would say
reserve.
that, go ahead and cover it, instead of coming to the city and asking for the $1,800. But if you have the money to cover it, then cover it.
My ask is based on the principle of the support of the original ask, not whether we could afford it or not. It's not a welfare ask. It's a principled ask.
Well, I think if you have the money, then pay it. Yeah.
Fair enough. Willing to hear from everybody on the council.
Pardon me?
I'm just
Yeah.
willing to hear from everybody on the council. And
Sure.
whatever the decision
Well,
is,
the
I'm
thing
okay with
is,
it.
when we have 2 members of the council on fire muster. That's stacking it, because I go to Vince, and Vince is going to say, pay it.
I'm gonna defer to Kara before I say anything.
So
Okay?
this
Kara?
is the challenge council has with with all of these events, when we have council members on the boards. And the challenge is that council tends to also be very involved with our community and wanting to be involved in, in these community events. And so our council ends up being on the boards of these events. And then we're taking monetary votes on these events. And this gets into a conflict of interest.
Yeah, and ethical.
And now we have something before council, and I mean nothing negative by this at all. But we have 5 council members and we have two members on this board. And normally that would be 2 people recusing themselves from a vote. And so then you have a monetary decision being made by 3 council members, and that's getting kind of skinny. And so quite frankly, it doesn't even matter what I think about it, because we have two no votes and 2 recuses, and it's done. And that's, so I agree this should go to all-day work session, and part of that discussion should be, how are we going to handle these types of conflicts of interest in the future?
And that we should also be on the premise of ethical responsibility and transparency. So, but, and these organizations, because we do want a robust event, entertainments in our city, we go out and raise the money. And so, and that's what we
That we
do.
do.
Is raise the money to fund these events. And And I'm okay with raising the money to fund it, rather than having the city pay for it. We have a policy in place, then we take a look at that policy.
Okay. May I ask a question to your
Sure.
statement? Rather than have the city pay for what? Because the city is involved in all of these events.
No.
It's very involved in the International Festival. It's very involved in the
But
Fire
we
Muster.
they follow the
It's also
policy.
involved in the Art and all
Yeah,
that jazz.
But it's,
And it's
there's a
involved in the heart of the
policy.
city, right.
And we have a policy that allows for that involvement. It's a partnership.
Exactly.
It's
And there's a cost
partnership.
share in that partnership.
But this
that the
is an
city
exception that
offers.
you're coming in and asking for this.
Yeah,
It's an exception.
I'm tagging on to my original ask.
Yeah.
That's purely all that is,
Yeah.
okay?
And
And in respecting
yeah.
the yes or no doesn't matter. I'm bringing it back because it's germane to the original ask, which was supported.
Yeah.
That was it.
And I do get that you're bringing
and
this
I'm-
back
yeah.
because the intent of your original ask was that the second night of
Yep.
fireworks
Yep.
is covered. It was not delineated. I do understand that.
That's the only reason I brought it
I
up.
understand that.
And I do too. The thing is, if you have the funds, then dip into it. It was a mistake that you made.
Yeah.
And so you cover the mistake like anything else. I do remember when the fire muster at one time had fireworks Friday and Saturday, and they covered the additional expense. They didn't come to us for any money for the second show or to cover they raised the money for it.
Was
So
that the 50th anniversary year, or was that actually a regular thing that happened every year?
no, it was only about 2 or 3. I think there was times that they did that. But
Yeah, I know that, I can't remember
I
any
don't
time that they
remember
had
what
them,
the-
like on a
the
regular basis, but I know
special-
we came back, I don't know who was the liaison. That was me, probably. At that time, Councilmember Workman is the liaison to the fire muster today and has been for a couple of years. But I remember coming and asking for additional support as a one-off for our city's 50th anniversary. And that fire muster, I think, was how many years ago was that? That we were 50 years old?
I don't remember, but the thing is, there wasn't, it was just only for the fireworks and not for the cost of
Right.
of staff. So all I'm saying is I'm following that, and you know, you have the money. I understand that you have a pretty good reserve, so dip
Yeah,
into your
it's-
reserve.
Again, it has nothing to do with, it's not a
Yeah.
welfare ask. It's a principled ask based on the original.
Yeah.
Well, I think because the discussion has been brought up, we need to state something that we all know, but maybe the public doesn't. I volunteer all of my time
Yeah,
for
we
the
all
fire muster.
volunteer.
You volunteer
We
all your
volunteer.
time. Dan
Yeah, yeah.
volunteers all his time for the All Knowledge Jazz. And Vince is a monster volunteer of time for the fire muster as well.
Yeah.
We're a 501c3 nonprofit.
Yeah, so is the International
Right.
Festival.
So
So is the Art and All That Jazz.
There is no personal gain
Yeah.
whatsoever.
Yeah.
There's only personal, massive, personal time sacrifice to give to put the event on for the citizens and residents of Burnsville.
Okay.
That's the reason that we do it, and that's the fire muster has a 41-year history. Started in 1980 by 7 people who put together
And
the
it was
original one.
all, they raised the money for all of that, and that Darwin, Bolton.
Do you know
Kirk-
that they asked $25 from each business that they contacted, and there was only a list of about 20?
Yeah.
And some gave 35 and some gave 50.
Yeah.
I was the beneficiary of the original 3-ring binder from one of the original founders, the treasurer, and I got to go through page by page and see the concept drawings, the ideas, the jam sessions, the creative sessions of what do we want to do, and it was 7 original board members, and the revenue from sponsorships was about 18 or 20 businesses at $25 each in 1980, with a couple higher than that. But anyway, it was a great trip back in town, back in time to the roots of the fire muster. But it requires an enormous amount of time from a large group of volunteers. I could name many already, but then the day of the event, both Wednesday, Thursday, and especially Friday, Saturday, many large groups, Rotary, athletic associations, Lions Club, all come together. And now there's tons of volunteers that are actually making it happen on those days. And so it's a big community nonprofit effort to celebrate. And it is our one big legacy festival that goes back 40 years. And, you know, none of us are getting anything personal out of it except one hell of a lot of lost personal time.
Right.
Okay.
And in my comment, and if I left that impression with
No,
anyone
not
at
at all. I
home or
just thought it was a good
anyone
statement to make.
on council, I definitely do not mean that the conflict is a personal monetary conflict. It's
The opposite.
yeah, exactly. No, I know you're donors, not takers.
I didn't interpret.
But, you know, I mean, when you are on a board, there just is a conflict, and, you know,
I think each of us feels possessive over our individual boards, and I think that's what you're trying to get at.
Yes,
right?
yes,
Even though
that's-
I think we all equally support each other's festival, it's hard not to see that optic of taking possession over each.
right. Well, I mean, and because you guys are very passionate and involved in, you know, the festivals and community gatherings that you're volunteering for and being part of the board for and that kind of stuff. So that's absolutely understandable on that.
Okay. Do you have anything to say or add?
Do I have anything to say?
Yeah, or add?
Oh, I can say a lot of things. No, nothing of note from our list. I will just quick mention, I was in a, that Dakota County, emergency and disaster training a week or so ago.
Oh, no, I meant, are we closing out this
I
discussion?
thought we were
Do-
done with that.
Oh, okay.
I don't have anything to add. I, you know, would echo Dan's points. It would be welcome, but if it's not there, that's okay too. We've got reserves and we can
that you
handle
can
it.
cover it, because that's what I thought, is that you had a lot of money.
I wouldn't
So
say it's
I'm
a
just
lot of-
saying-
No, it's the lowest it's been in probably a couple decades, from what I understand. But it's okay, we're all right.
Okay, great, okay. All right, then, we'll then shift to reports.
Now you can do it.
Now you can, you can give your report.
Yeah, I went to a disaster and emergency training with, I cannot remember his name right now, but he's the state guy. So if there's a disaster in Minnesota, he's the guy. And it was very interesting, and if you guys ever get an opportunity to do that, or if you haven't already, I would highly recommend
I
it.
have already done that a couple
It
of times.
was Joe Kelly, Director of
Yeah.
Homeland Security,
Yeah.
State Emergency Management Director, at the new Smart Center. And I mentioned it to Melanie, and it sounds like we're gonna have a similar type of presentation next meeting.
Yeah, well, that'd be crisis communications, yep,
Okay.
yep.
But other than that, that's all I have for right now.
Okay,
Amy will be here next week for present for Experience Burnsville, and so that's the committee I would be talking about, but she's got all the news on it, so
okay,
we'll leave it to her capable hands.
okay. Kara?
Actually, tomorrow is when I hit Dakota County broadband, so we're missing my report by a day, so I'll be giving it at the next
December?
one. But I think we're still making good progress and moving forward on that. So I'm pretty happy with how things are going with that. So, yeah.
Okay. Dan?
Oh, I've got tons of transportation stuff, but I'm just trying to think if there's anything that's really pertinent to us. To the council. We're working on, STA is working on legislative positioning and priorities. One key thing, we'd like the suburban transit providers like MBTA to be direct recipients of federal funding, because we've learned that funding that goes through the Met Council can be allocated differently than if we'd have got it directly. And we do and are looking at and considering a legislative position on finding some authors to be able to propose that the suburban transit providers be underneath MnDOT rather than Met Council. Not a new idea, as Madam Mayor noted in previous discussion. That came up many years ago, maybe 20 years ago. We'd love to see MVest increase a little bit, but it's run high for the full last 18 months of the pandemic. Car buying has never really suffered much, which is interesting. I-35 Solutions, we got a presentation, great presentation on Highway 13 traffic study and staging. So the rest of the Solutions group got a taste of Burnsville and Highway 13. From Nicollet all the way, obviously, to 169, so through Savage and Shakopee. But interesting concepts for different intersections in that route, but all will help. But construction of the very first one is going to be extraordinarily brutal, and I'm not even sure where the end of the line of cars could end up going eastbound and westbound through that area. But that's coming in the not-too-distant future. TAB, we had a pretty healthy discussion on something that is from a principled standpoint. We had, back in 2009, through the regional solicitation process, $5.2 million in federal grant was given to Met Transit for a new transit station on I-94. The transit station, it takes many, many, many years from the award to where it actually shovels are in the ground, put it that way. It wasn't until just 2020 that they finally decided that the additional park and ride wasn't feasible. And they needed to return the $7.2 million. However, they had already spent $2.2 million on some additional buses servicing that existing route and decided to shore up another park and ride that was already there. So we had a real interesting discussion about holding an awardee accountable for doing what they say and pitched that we're going to do, because obviously that $7.2 million was being sought after by a multitude of other projects that didn't get chosen. And then 11 or 12 years later, they've spent $2.2 million and they basically want to only refund $5 million. So that was a very interesting discussion that I think we ultimately settled on in this particular case, that we would accept the $5 million, but there is we're going to go back and review the entire process of awarding and what is required and making sure that we don't have this situation again. Because in theory, you could just say, well, I think we can do it. You pitch in, you get the award, and then go, well, we've changed our mind. We're going to use the money for something else. And that's not good. So that was an eye-opening experience on TAB, which is, as I noted, is going to result in a very interesting process, meeting and study, and shore up where we may have some weak areas in our requirements attached to money that we give out. The other thing I'll note, we have $725 million in transit dollars from the Fed stimulus coming to our region, and decisions on how that's going to be allocated will be done by the Met Council in February. So more stimulus money coming in to the metro area. There is one last thing I forgot. We got $20 million from the Coronavirus Response and Relief and Supplemental Appropriations Act. $20 million was given back to the Met Council for TAB to determine its use. They presented three options. One of them, which was heavily favored by the TAC committee, and most people in voicing their opinion, was to basically go through this map of allocation of every city in the metro area and give them a piece of it. Think of the $250 million debate at the Capitol on the frontline workers, right? Giving them something, and you've got, you know, one that says, let's give it to everybody, which is a small amount, and then one that's, let's give it to just these people, so it's a larger amount. So we had three options, but the one that is probably gonna survive vote at our next meeting is a little bit to everybody, and that actually is gonna mean $204,000 coming to Burnsville for our roadways. Now, I think that'll buy a few feet of pavement, but, so it's not $200,000 is a lot of money until you think you're gonna use it for transit and roads and bridges, and you think, wow, that'll not buy much, but we'll take it. So anyway, that was it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, our MLC met, and what was pertinent for that meeting is that our guest speaker was Representative Jim Nash. And he co-chairs the Legislative Commission on Affordable Housing. And so that was a long discussion because you all know where we stand with regard to local control. And of course, there was pushback from Lakeville and Prior Lake and Woodbury because they're the ones who are still developing. And the whole issue of affordable housing and taking away local control. But he promised that he would work with us because he says there is a solution, right, Craig? But whatever that solution is, we want to be at the table rather than the solution being achieved by the people who are in this legislative commission. So I don't think anybody was real happy. Is that correct?
That was my feeling, Madam Mayor.
With that whole, so it'll be an interesting legislative session coming up. But again, we're fighting for local control. And those cities that are still developing are really at the front end of all of this. And that's Lakeville, Prior Lake, Woodbury, and that's it. So that was the big thing about that. And then Eden Prairie gave an update about their development. And then we acted on the vote on Rick Getchow to be vice chair of MLC. And then the auditor's report, we voted on that and accepted it. And then looked at our lobbying evaluation survey, and that was done. And then they reported on all the different subcommittees within MLC. And then upcoming meetings, and that we'll be looking at our meetings for the breakfast before the legislative. And so that's it. Community Foundation meets on Thursday. The last meeting, we were focused on the holiday lighting and also the snowflakes. Our Burnsville Savage meeting, that's coming up because we only meet on a quarterly basis. And so that's it, because nothing in International Festival. Not yet. I'll start raising money in January. Okay.
I'm gonna start in December this year, just so I can start before you.
Oh, good.
I've already started.
Go for it. Okay. Melanie and Craig, are there anything? Michelle, anything? We stand adjourned by acclamation. Yeah.